Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. Putin unleashes hell in Ukraine. Ooh, them Nazis is running for it. Trump stalling for time. Before we get in all that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Y'all, well, World War III is still on the table. Putin is tired of playing. NATO, the U.S., y'all can all be struck at any moment. Let's get into the content. Salute. Putin tired of playing with these people.
A few hours ago, the Russian Defense Ministry officially confirmed that on the night of May 24, Russia launched a massive missile strike on Ukraine. The official report says that during this massive missile strike, Russian missile forces, along with the Russian aerospace forces, used Iskander ballistic missiles, Kinzhal and Zircon hypersonic missiles, Kh-101 cruise missiles, geranium kamikaze drones, and even the world's most powerful intermediate-range ballistic missiles, Orshnik. Furthermore, the Russian Defense Ministry noted that during this missile strike, all the designated targets were successfully hit and destroyed. At the same time, it is reported that this massive missile strike on Ukraine was a retaliation for the Kiev regime's terrorist attack on a college in the city of Starobilsk, Luhansk region, which killed 21 people and seriously injured 42. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that on May 22, Ukraine, using kamikaze drones, deliberately attacked the dormitory of Starobilsk College. It is reliably known that at the time of the attack, 86 people were in the building, including children aged 14 to 18 years. At the same time, it is worth noting that Western countries, including the United States, refused to condemn Ukraine's strike on a college in the city of Starobilsk. Furthermore, the Western media is trying not to cover this terrorist attack, while Zelensky himself smiles hypocritically and denies hitting the college by Ukrainian kamikaze drones. As for the Russian retaliatory strike, on the morning of May 24, the first details of a massive missile strike on Ukraine began to appear. So, a few hours ago, independent monitoring services confirmed dozens of powerful explosions in cities such as Dnipropetrovsk, Kirovograd, Mirorod, Poltava, Starokonstantinov, Bila Tserkva, and Kiev. At the same time, it is reported that during this missile attack, for the first time since the start of a special military operation, Russia attacked 7 military airfields simultaneously in the eastern, central, and western parts of Ukraine. Moreover, it is well known that dozens of expensive Kinzhal and Zircon hypersonic missiles attacked all these airfields. Monitoring services have confirmed that Russian hypersonic missiles attacked Ukraine from 3 directions: from the south, east, and north. By the way, Russian Telegram channels have confirmed that Zircon hypersonic missiles were launched for the first time from the recently liberated Kursk region. As a result, dozens of targets in Kiev and its surroundings were hit and destroyed within 2-3 minutes. Numerous sources confirm that the missile attack on Kiev lasted more than 5 hours. At the moment, Ukrainian firefighters are trying to cope with 50 fires in the city center and within its limits. It is noteworthy that, as of May 24, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, NASA's firm's satellite system continues to record the maximum number of fires throughout Kiev. It is reported that in the first minutes of the missile attack on Kiev alone, dozens of facilities belonging to the Security Service of Ukraine and the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense were destroyed. In addition, Russian missiles also wiped out the production facilities of the Artyom plant, where Ukrainian military engineers, together with their colleagues from NATO states, have set up production of reconnaissance and attack drones. It is also worth noting the Russian strike on the Kiev region, using two of the latest Orshnik intermediate-range ballistic missiles. As it turned out, one of these latest Russian missiles struck a strategically important facility in the city of Bila Tserkva, which is located 75 kilometers from Kiev. In particular, we are talking about the aircraft repair plant. It is reliably known that during this strike, all the assembly shops of this plant were destroyed, along with French H-225 Super Puma helicopters. In addition, the Russians also destroyed the thermal power plant and transport hubs in this city. It is noteworthy that simultaneously with this, another Orshnik ballistic missile hit the territory in the southwestern part of Kiev, where there were two underground bunkers. It is reported that at the time of this attack, 30 officers of the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, as well as 17 high-ranking NATO officers, were in these underground bunkers. By the way, it is worth noting that right after this Russian attack, the North Atlantic Alliance sent 5 flying hospitals to the Polish city of Rzeszów. All this indicates that dozens of coffins with NATO soldiers and officers will soon be sent to Poland. Mark my words, all these NATO soldiers and officers will soon be officially recognized as dead, as a result of accidents during military drills. Moreover, it is reported that it was these destroyed decision-making centers that organized the attack on the college in the city of Starobilsk, Luhansk region. Thus, with this missile strike, Russia not only demonstrated its ability to wipe Ukraine off the face of the earth easily, but also brutally avenged the deaths of innocent students in the Luhansk region. By the way, on the morning of May 24, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev called on Russian generals to launch such massive missile strikes against Ukraine almost every day. Furthermore, he also stressed that Russia must increase the power of such massive missile strikes with each new time. According to him, the ruins and ashes of Kiev demoralize the enemy much faster than the loss of the battle banner on the battlefield. Simply put, he made it clear that Russia should act as harshly as possible, and stop feeling sorry for the neighboring country. My dear friends, I am absolutely sure that many of you will agree with Dmitry Medvedev's statement.
Russian fury is now raining down on Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and the strikes show no signs of stopping, with Vladimir Putin vowing to retaliate harshly against Ukrainian attacks on student dormitories. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed that it launched retaliatory strikes against military and industrial targets, primarily in and around Kyiv, on the night of May 23 to 24, 2026. Several types of advanced missiles were used in these attacks, such as the feared Oreshnik, Iskander, Kinzhal, and Zircon missiles. The Russian Navy will also participate in one of the largest attacks in years overnight. Ukrainian monitoring channels reported a map of nighttime missile and drone attacks on targets in Ukraine, with approximately 700 drones and 100 missiles including Oreshniks, launched at Kyiv alone. As Oreshnik missiles, each carrying 36 kinetic energy warheads, struck targets in the city, no system was able to intercept them. Oreshnik is an ICBM equipped with conventional warheads that relies on a MIRV trajectory to destroy underground targets or bunkers. Meanwhile, reports indicate that more than 12 Kinzhal and Iskander-K missiles struck Kyiv, along with several interceptions, during an unprecedented combined Russian missile and drone attack. The Russian Ministry of Defense listed the top targets during the retaliatory strike, noting successful hits on all targets, primarily military-industrial complex facilities, military infrastructure, Ukrainian Army command posts, and the Intelligence Directorate. There were no strikes on civilian infrastructure, the Ministry of Defense added. More from Kyiv on the morning that people woke up to severe damage, with fires in underground infrastructure clearly visible. Zelensky really infuriated Putin, stating that Russia would not tolerate attacks on such despicable targets as schools. A massive fireball erupted after Russia bombed weapons factories. It appears the explosions destroyed an ammunition depot. Suddenly, secondary explosions erupted, indicating that significant amounts of ammunition were stored there. At a separate location, serious damage resulted from an explosion at the Lukyanivska metro station, after cruise missiles and ballistic missiles struck the Artem plant, located across the street. Data from NASA firm's fire monitoring system shows a major fire breaking out at a factory for Ukraine's defense. Artem is known for producing air-to-air missiles, automated training and maintenance systems for air-to-air guided missiles, anti-tank guided missiles, and aircraft equipment. Additional data from NASA firm's system indicates that a major fire is raging at the ATB warehouse on the western outskirts of the city, following the launch of at least 2 Russian Kinzhal-type missiles. Additionally, a major fire is raging at the Ukrainian Security Service office in the Bodelsky district. Further data indicates major fires have broken out at the Analit factory, and the former Relay Avtomatiki factory, and several major fires have erupted in the Darnitsky industrial zone, which is believed to be the target of 4 Zircon model hypersonic cruise missiles. On May 22, 2026, Russia reported that the Kyiv regime launched a drone attack on the dormitory of the Starobelsk Teachers College in Luhansk, killing 21 people aged 17 to 22, and injuring a total of 63. At the time of the attack, there were 86 teenagers, boys and girls aged 14 to 18, inside the building. Part of the 5-story building collapsed, and all the victims' bodies were successfully evacuated from the rubble. It was not a military target. These were children who were simply sleeping before a regular school day. Just seeing it is enough to make one's throat tighten. According to Russia, the retaliation is not just a warning for Kyiv, it is also a warning to European leaders.
Russia rained down its new Oreshnik missile on Ukraine, and America's Patriot air defense system was left scrambling against one of the deadliest aerial assaults of the war. Moscow claims its nuclear-capable hypersonic missile pierced through Ukraine's US-supplied defenses during a massive saturation strike involving drones, ballistic missiles, and hypersonic weapons, raising fresh questions over whether Western missile shields are struggling against next-generation warfare. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, the strike involved Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missiles, alongside Iskander, Kinzhal, and Zircon missiles targeting Ukrainian military command posts, air bases, and defense industrial facilities. Russia says the attack was retaliation for what it called Ukrainian terrorist attacks on civilian infrastructure inside Russian territory. So what exactly is the Oreshnik? Analysts believe it is a road-mobile, nuclear-capable IRBM derived from the RS-26 Rubezh platform. The missile reportedly travels at speeds approaching Mach 10 to Mach 11 during its terminal phase and can carry multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, or MIRVs. In simple terms, one missile can split into several maneuvering warheads mid-flight, overwhelming enemy tracking systems. That is where the Patriot system faces its biggest challenge. Patriot PAC-3 batteries are designed mainly for short-range ballistic threats and lower atmosphere interception. But the Oreshnik flies higher, dives steeper, and descends much faster, compressing interception windows to just seconds. Analysts say maneuvering hypersonic warheads can also alter trajectory during re-entry, making direct hit-to-kill interception extremely difficult. There is also what defense experts call the radar dead cone problem. Patriot's phased array radar does not provide full 360-degree coverage. If a missile drops almost vertically at extreme speed, tracking can briefly break in the final moments before interception. Russia appears to have exploited this by combining the Oreshnik strike with hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles in a saturation-style assault designed to overload Ukrainian defenses. The concerns are not limited to Ukraine. During the recent Iran conflict, Patriot systems reportedly burned through interceptors at unsustainable rates against cheaper drones and missile swarms. But experts say Patriot is not obsolete. Rather, modern warfare is evolving faster, with hypersonic weapons, MIRVs, and mass drone attacks, exposing the limits of even the world's most advanced air defense systems.
Let's break down what happened over the weekend with the strikes into Kiev, and not only Kiev, the outskirts of Kiev and other parts of Ukraine. Of course, the talk is of the Orezhnik. That was the big weapon that was used, and everyone is reacting to the Orezhnik being used, including leaders in the collective West in Europe. And this was in retaliation to the terrorist attack against the dormitory. I call it a terrorist attack, even though Ukraine, the collective West media, refused to acknowledge such a thing. I have not seen any evidence to counter that. And you also have journalists on the ground in Lugansk as well, though BBC, CNN, and other journalists from the collective West refused to go to the location of the dormitory strike. And where are we with all of this? What is the reaction? What's going to be the effect of this? Is it going to be seen as a one-off, or just going to go back to where we were with escalating drone attacks? How do you see all of this playing out?
Right. The first thing to say is that I completely agree with your assessment about Starobelsk. I have read all the various statements made by the Western officials, the ambassadors at the UN Security Council. And the fascinating thing about this is that they refuse to really address what actually happened in Starobelsk at all. And as you rightly say, journalists were invited to go. Some journalists have gone. There is no doubt whatsoever that what was attacked was a student dormitory. Now, you could argue that this was a mistake, that the Ukrainians might have thought that they were attacking something else, but they're not convincingly explaining why, nor is the West on their behalf. The reaction in the West is to basically say as little about this incident as they can. In fact, not as they can, to say as little about this incident, period. So when the Russian retaliation happened, and it was enormous, the response from the West, from Macron, from Kaya Kallas, from the British government, from everybody basically, is that this Russian attack simply comes out of the clear blue sky. The Russians decided to attack Kiev in this massive way, and there's no linkage made, or scarcely any linkage made, and well, certainly not by governments. There is no linkage made to the attack on Starobelsk at all. Now, about the strikes, I think that this Russian strike was obviously the biggest and the most powerful that we have seen against Kiev since the start of the war. And the Orezhnik itself was used against this target in this town to the south of Kiev. There is an airfield there. There are industrial facilities there. But the Russian Defense Ministry is saying that command bunkers of what they call the General Command of Ukraine and of Ukrainian military intelligence, which is Budanov's old outfit, that they were attacked. And I wonder whether the Ukrainians have relocated some of the command headquarters of these organizations to this town. and whether that was what the Russians attacked with the Oreshnik. Now, we're never one of the consistent patterns of Oreshnik strikes is that you can clearly see after each one that Western leaders are shocked. I mean, if you see what Macron has said after this one, and indeed Kaja Kallas, they are clearly very, very shocked. But the Ukrainians never allow anybody to go there, to the place where the attack has happened. It takes sometimes years before we get satellite photos. We've only now started to receive satellite photos from the Yuzhmash factory in Dnipro, which was attacked with an Oreshnik in November 2024. So that makes it very difficult for us to look at what the action, what happened, and to make an independent assessment of the damage that was done to these facilities which were attacked by the Oreshnik. The satellite photos of the Yuzhmash factory suggest to me enormous damage. And by the way, very, very great precision indeed from the attack. There's been some questions about how precise this weapon is. To me, it looks like it was very precise. I mean, it was one specific network of buildings that were attacked. Probably it's the same, so I'm sure it's the same here, but it's impossible for us to say. But in every other respect, we see buildings, factories, plants, all sorts of other buildings whose nature we don't quite understand. They were attacked by the Russians. They were attacked with all kinds of weapons. They were attacked with Kinjal missiles. They were attacked with Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles, which interestingly were launched on the ground. They weren't launched by sea. So the Russians have now developed mobile launchers for these Zircon missiles, which means that they can attack from various parts of Russian territory. They can also conduct strikes on Ukraine from, Lugansk and Dnipro. In other words, from the territory of, pre-2014 Ukraine, the part of the territory that is under Russian control. Which makes it very difficult for the Ukrainians to anticipate where these attacks are going to come from. But anyway, the point is, the attacks took place. Ukrainian air defense collapsed. Massive damage was done. You could see the smoke from all kinds of buildings and structures. You could see pictures of some of the damage done to some of the buildings. Drone footage, which must ultimately have come from the Russians. It's clear that the attack was devastating. And, well, I get to say this, compare this attack with the big drone attack that the Ukrainians carried out against Moscow a few days ago, about a week ago. And you could see the contrast. The air defense in Kiev didn't work. The air defense in Moscow did. Most of the Ukrainian drones didn't get through. All of the Russian missiles, from what I can see, basically did get through. Massive damage done in Kiev, ephemeral light damage done in Moscow. There is no comparison between these strikes. We are going to see more strikes of this kind. You do not prepare a strike as complex as this within a few days or a few hours. There is clearly already preparations underway in Russia for strikes like this, using Oreshniks, Kinjals, Zircons, other types of cruise missiles and drones. This is obviously the first of many such attacks that we are going to see. Probably they're going to start to build up significantly in the summer. So we've just seen the shape of things to come.
Okay, so you don't consider this to be a one-off?
No.
Okay. Do the Europeans, are the Europeans going to see this, the West, the US, NATO, are they going to see this as a one-off, or are they going to brush this off? Let's put it that way. Are they going to say, you know what? Putin got his retaliation. Russia got their retaliation. We can go back to our drone plans, right? And trying to hit the energy facilities and trying to shake and destabilize Russia. They're already saying that this is a sign of weakness from Russia. It's not a sign of strength. And they're all putting out the same message with regards to why this strike happened and what it means. It means that Russia is weak, not that Russia is strong. Is this where we're gonna go with this? The Europeans are going to continue to escalate. They're going to continue to try and put pressure on Russia through sanctions. The U.S. is going to continue to supply weapons or sell the weapons to the Europeans. Zelensky is going to continue to travel around and look for money and look for weapons.
Right, I'll tell you what's going to happen. Firstly, whenever you see an irrational strike take place, there is a consistent pattern. The first response from Western leaders, people like Macron. I mean, I bear in mind, I'm used to reading messages and seeing, judging how people respond. The first response is shock. I mean, they are shocked by the scale of the attack that happens. Then you can see that they all talk to each other. They all agree on the message that they're going to convey. And always they come back. They start to say to themselves and to everyone else, this isn't a sign of strength. It is a sign of weakness. They brush it off or try to pretend that they're brushing it off. They pretend to each other and to the world that they're not really shocked. And then they all together in unison say that they're going to continue to support Ukraine. So that is the recurring cycle. They're not going to turn around and admit to themselves or to their publics that the game is lost. I mean, that's just not going to happen. I mean, they will go on supporting Ukraine until Ukraine is completely devastated, because they know there's going to be more of these strikes, but they're going to, again, will the fact that these strikes happen away. Now, you said about American weapons. The weapons that Ukraine is getting at the present time are basically drones. I mean, they're not getting much in the way of tanks, armored vehicles. You remember the enormous push to get them fighter jets, which were going to change the course of the war. I mean, that's basically stopped as well. I mean, the actual supply of heavy weapons has effectively ended now. It is purely drones. And that, of course, will continue. And the drone offensives against Russia will continue as well. So they're not going to change course. They are going to try to intensify the sanctions. They are going to try to do all of these things. Their policy isn't going to change. The more interesting thing is what is happening on the Russian side, because a thing that people are not noticing is, you remember we've said many times that after Valdai, Putin basically disappeared from the scene. Well, he's been gradually re-emerging over the last few weeks. And then after the attack on Starobelsk, he came out and spoke finally and clearly. And what he said was completely in line with what Medvedev, Lavrov, and others have been saying up to now, that this is, I'm going to use careful language, an extreme militant terrorist regime. I mean, he used even stronger language than that. It is also illegitimate. It is compulsively violent. He spoke in a way that made it completely clear to me that he no longer believes in negotiations. He doesn't believe that negotiations will ever have any kind of successful outcome. The language he used to describe the government and leadership in Kiev was such as far as I can see, would rule out totally any possibility of a negotiation with them. And well, as soon as he spoke, we had another message from Medvedev basically saying the same thing. So I've been saying that the Russian stance over the last few months since Valdai has been hardening. And it's clear to me that that is the position. And the Russians have also said that negotiations involving the Americans are over. We had Ushakov say that the spirit of anchorage, he doesn't even know what it is. We discussed that in a previous program.
No one knows what it is.
No one knows.
Right.
No, well, I mean, he was completely.
I know, I'm joking too.
Yeah, I know, but he was being completely
No,
disingenuous
that's fair.
because to the extent that that expression has ever been used at all, it's been used previously by the Russians. It was the
Revolutionary salute to our family. AIB Chill 2 for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. I absolutely appreciate the love that you helped me keep the lights on here at the Revolution. The brothers say, peace alert, peace alert. I want unity in the community. Peace and blessings, code. Peace and blessings to you, family. I appreciate the love. Salute.
It was the Russians who talked about a spirit of anchorage. But Ushakov says that there is no spirit of anchorage. There never has been a spirit of anchorage. I don't know what the spirit of anchorage is that people are talking about and all of that. Well, I mean, he is burying the whole negotiation. Even Rubio now is admitting the negotiation is basically over. And I can't imagine that we're going to see negotiations anymore. And from this point on, it's just going to be the war and the Russian offensive and more missile strikes. And the offensive is going to intensify over the course of the summer, as it always does.
So a lot of people are wondering why were these military facilities, these factories that were targeted, why were they allowed to operate for so many years? Why were they not targeted earlier?
Well, I think
and the Europeans, just to wrap up the video, and the Europeans, they are coming out with more statements where they believe that Russia's running out of time, that Putin's running out of time, that Putin wants to make a deal because he's running out of time, and there are people in Europe, in the EU, very high up, who actually believe that the tide has turned, and they're going to win this thing.
Yes,
it's clear that they really do believe this.
Yes,
I don't think it's wishful thinking or they're just trying to fool anybody or game anybody. They really do believe that the tide has turned and they are now going to win this war. So wrap up the video with
I mean we go through these periods, and I think there is wishful thinking, and then of course it's repeated so often that it becomes accepted fact, as it always does, and they're all saying this to each other. And the result is that eventually they come to believe what they're saying themselves. And we've been here before. We were here in the autumn of 2022. We were here in the spring of 2023. We've had similar statements made this time last year, by the way. People forget that this time last year, people were also talking about a stalemate. And even then, they were talking about drone walls. And so we get this repeated cycle of comments and observations of this kind. And yes, they do believe it. And the reason they believe it is very simple, because they don't want negotiations to happen with the Russians. There are some people in Europe who don't believe it, who are now saying we've got to negotiate. We've got to talk to the Russians. We've got to move forward with negotiations with the Russians. We've got to appoint a chief negotiator. But the British don't want that to happen. The Scandinavians don't want that to happen. The Balts absolutely do not want that to happen. Ursula and Kaja Kallas do not want that to happen. So they run with this narrative that they start to believe themselves. Now, this isn't perhaps the best moment, because, at the tail end of a program like this, talking about the whole situation on the front lines.
You don't have to get into the details of it.
The Russians,
we can do another program.
That, The Russians continue to move forward. They are breaking through in Zaporozhye. Konstantinovka is clearly falling. Even commentators who are not as close to, they're more closer to the Ukrainian side, are now beginning to understand that Konstantinivka is a huge crisis. There's been people who have pointed out that this so-called Ukrainian counterattack, deep strike, the Ukrainian mapping project, is not actually returning any territory to Ukraine. I mean, they're not actually showing any Ukrainian gains. So, what is actually going on? So the realities on the front lines tell a completely different story. And of course, the other part of the narrative was about the Russian economy. We discussed the Russian economy in massive detail in various programs. We've explained that there was a major slowdown over the course of 2025, which was deliberately engineered, in my opinion, over-engineered by the central bank and Putin in order to bring inflation down. Inflation is now falling fast. In fact, we've had 2 weeks of deflation in Russia, not consecutive weeks, but we've had 2 weeks of inflation and deflation in Russia over the last few weeks. There's a good chance that the central bank is going to overshoot its inflation target. In my opinion, we could see inflation fall below 4%, which is what they've been talking about. Monetary conditions, nonetheless, are going to start to ease. The effect of the tax increase over the winter
Deal or no deal? President Trump made his mark on the world about being able to be this great deal maker, the art of the deal. He ran on that in 2016. He ran on it again in 2020, 2024. He always talks about how he can get a deal nobody else can. His acolytes always say this president could bring people to negotiations that no one else could. But none of that matters if you can't close the deal. And if you set the conditions to where it's going to be nearly impossible for you to have a deal that you like, then you're going to be in a world of hurt. And that is the condition that we're in right now because President Trump made the bad decision to start a war that was against the U.S. Constitution and against American national interest. Now he is in a deep hole. So the question is he going to dig deeper? Or is he going to climb out? Because there's a ladder to which he could get out, and there's a shovel with which he could dig deeper. The question is going to be, what is he going to do? And everybody in the world is waiting to find out. This morning, he gave yet more information here on Truth Social. This first one here was about 6:10 a.m. So you see, he got an early start to the day. He just rants a bunch of stuff in the first part. I won't even bother reading that. But then you get down to the bottom part here that I have highlighted. The deal with Iran will either be great and meaningful one, or there will be no deal, hence deal or no deal. It will be the exact opposite of the JCPOA disaster negotiated by the failed Obama administration, which was a direct and open path to a nuclear weapon for Iran. No, I don't do deals like that. Now, he is potentially painting himself into a corner here as well. He keeps talking about how the JCPOA that Obama did in 2015, which President Trump withdrew from in 2018, he keeps saying that this is a terrible deal and we can't go back down that path. I'm not going to do that. That was a path to a bomb, which of course is 100% false. No truth to it whatsoever. That was a deal that was negotiated painstakingly over about 2 years that would have ensured Iran never had a nuclear weapon because everything that you want, very limited enrichment, independent international inspectors, a small portion of enrichment, 3.67%, way far away from any kind of nuclear weapons grade enrichment. Very small amounts of enrichment would be allowed to be in the country. They had shipped out, I forget how many tons of it, of various types they shipped out of the country, and they had very small stockpiles that they were even allowed to have. And there was no path to having a bomb, on top of the fact that they declared that they had no interest in having a bomb. So all of those things, that's what the JCPOA did, which President Trump withdrew from. And after that, then they went up to 20% enrichment, then they went to 60% enrichment every time in response to our staying out of the deal or something that we did with new sanctions or whatever to go on top of it. And they were always trying to get back into it. That's the reality and that's the truth. But now President Trump has to validate why he pulled out of there, because he can't acknowledge the reality, the truth that I just laid out for you, because then it would be, wait a minute, if that was actually a good deal and we would kill to have something that good right now, he's got to say, okay, well, that was a bad deal, but I'm going to have a good deal. Here's part of the problem why I say he paints himself into a corner by going back to this Obama stuff. One of the biggest things he kept bashing Obama about was the, quote, giving them billions of dollars. You remember that? Because part of that deal with the 2015 was the unfreezing of frozen Iranian assets, and then they had access to their money. President Trump mischaracterized that to appeal to his base and to Israeli supporters and said that Obama gave them money, paid them to do all this stuff, which of course was always untrue. But he's stayed with that as recently as this weekend, keeps harping on that point there. Well, one of the key requirements for the Iranian side in this current round is the unfreezing of assets. And I've seen anywhere from 11 billion to 12 billion to 30 billion, something like that. I think the total is around 100 and something billion that's frozen, but they're like, let's start with a good chunk of it. And then we have phased sanctions relief, et cetera. And then kind of a one for one, you do something, we'll do something, and on and on like that. That's what they have said. And by the way, the Iranian side is willing to negotiate. You're going to see some details on that during this show here. They're saying they're not just saying, no, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to demand everything and that's it. They say they're willing to negotiate on some of the issues. They are willing to give something to get something. So that's a positive sign, and that's an opportunity for us to end this war and to get it off the table and to stop digging deeper, this hole that we've dug ourselves into. But the question is Trump going to go through with that? So that first Truth Social show you was at 6:10 this morning. Then about 2 some odd hours later, he posted this one, and this is, again, a really long one, and I'm not going to include all the first part of it. He's ranting on and on about all these things that happened. He wants peace that's never happened in 5,000 years and listed all of these Middle Eastern leaders that he'd been talking to, et cetera. But then we get to the key parts here, and I also highlighted, he said, listen, the level of importance and prestige would be unparalleled if he has these agreements. It should start with the immediate signing by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and everybody else, and this is talking about the Abraham Accords, should follow suit. If they don't, they should not be part of this deal, and in that shows their bad intentions. Then we move down to the next part. Therefore, I am mandatorily requesting, and that alone is kind of weird use of the English language, that all countries immediately sign the Abraham Accords. And that if Iran signs its agreement with me as President of the United States of America, it would be an honor to have them also be a part of this unparalleled world coalition. Now, we're going to have Rajan Menon with us later on in the show. He's got something published this morning that talks about a lot of these contradictions, and he's specifically going to talk about the Abraham Accords. We're going to bring some light onto that. So I'm just looking forward to that later in the show here. But the bottom line is, now I'll just tell you categorically, Saudi Arabia is not going to sign the Abraham Accords because Trump has an angry Truth Social. I doubt anybody else will in the region either. There's a reason why they haven't. There has been some that signed the Abraham Accords during President Trump's first term, which, by the way, I was applauding. I thought it was a good deal. Anything that moves towards reconciliation between the Arab world and the Israeli world is a good thing. And if we can get more people in that and everybody's talking peace, that would be great. And if you could factor in the Iranian side of that somehow, so that it gets the fundamentals and the foundation that has led to so much conflict in the region off the table, that would be fantastic. Don't know if that's actually possible, but Saudi Arabia has said, listen, we're not going to do this. We're not going to sign the Abraham Accords unless the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank have a state of their own and they have some freedoms and they're no longer being attacked. They say, sure, once that gets, Saudi Arabia has always said, if that occurs, we will sign the Abraham Accords. And they're not going to not sign that now. They're not going to not require that now just because Trump puts out this Truth Social. So as far as I'm concerned, that's just forget about that. Rajan will explain more on that in a minute. Today, this morning, President Trump went on Fox News and said, by the way, great news here, 95% complete. We are 95% of the way there with the deal with Iran. Haven't we heard that before? How many times since this war began did we hear all kinds of stuff that Iran has largely agreed to everything? We basically had all the agreements and we're just going to have a signing here. And it never happens. And I just have to wonder, why do people keep listening to this stuff? And the markets react. I mean, that's what's so comical, tragic, comical about this, is that Trump says stuff like this, like he did over the weekends. And so as predictable as it can be, when the markets opened up, I think in early trading on Sunday night, and then earlier this morning when I last checked, huge drop in the price of oil, huge spike in the stock market, which President Trump lives for. So it is, in my view, a naked attempt to manipulate the market, because there's no truth to that. And let's take a look, as we always do. That's what President Trump is saying. Let's see what the other side is saying here. And here's a few dueling announcements here this morning. This first one here was at, I believe it was, yeah, there it is. This is 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here from Iran. And they said, this is from the Iranian news agency, senior Iranian diplomat, no commitments have been made to the other side in a potential agreement with the United States on the nuclear issue. President Trump, 95% complete. Iran, no commitments have been made. They continue on. The end of the war on all fronts, the release of Iran's frozen assets, there's that number again, the lifting of the U.S. maritime blockade, the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, and the freedom to sell Iran's oil are considered in potentials in the agreement. So again, you see the Iranian side says, yes, we are definitely willing to do that. Now, you notice in that first part there's basically two parts, two phases that Iran is willing to have negotiation. The first one that you see there in the blue on the upper left is they're talking about end the war on all fronts, and that primarily means Lebanon. That's the big stick in that one. That's one of the things that's a problem with Israel. The release of Iran's frozen assets, that's a big problem in Washington. The lifting of the U.S. maritime blockade, that's a simple decision that President Trump can make, but that they definitely want. They certainly want that one, maybe above all of those right away. The opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, that's key, because this is what Iran is saying. They want the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to see in a minute the conditions with which they think the strait should be opened, as opposed to what the U.S. does. And the freedom to sell Iran's oil are all considered in the potential agreement. Then you move to the next one, the upper right-hand corner, and this one was at 4:47 a.m., so about an hour and a half later. Senior Iranian diplomat, in the event that the American side fulfilling its commitments in progress in the first phase agreement, then, and only then, this is phase two, the nuclear issue, enrichment, stockpiles of highly enriched uranium will be addressed in exchange for the lifting of sanctions and the full release of Iran's frozen assets during the 60-day negotiation period, and American forces will completely withdraw from the region surrounding Iran. So their phase one and phase two, one is that they'll end the war in Lebanon. They get some of their frozen assets, and then you see in phase two, they get the rest of their frozen assets released. And then they'll talk about, they don't say anything about what they're willing to do, only that they're willing to talk about it. But President Trump keeps saying, Iran will never have a nuclear bomb. Iran will never have a nuclear bomb. All ad infinitum. He says it, almost every time he brings the issue up here. And then the issue with that is, of course, Iran is saying, yeah, we'll get to that later, like after this 60-day period that's coming on. We'll talk about these other things first. Talk about. And so we're in a not a quasi, we're in a ceasefire period right now. It's just ill-defined. Remember, it was supposed to be 2 weeks to try to figure something out, and then we extended it, and now we're just not shooting. So it could restart at any time, but we're just in this quasi area. Well, now they want to add another specific time frame, 60 days, and apparently both sides are talking that. But then what happens in those 60 days? President Trump says no nuclear weapons. Now, the Iranian side is saying, we'll talk about that in a couple of months from now. And in the meantime, we'll talk about the stuff that we want. So I don't know how President Trump's going to agree to that. So you see this whole claim of 95% of the way there, unless President Trump has made some radical changes in what he's willing to agree to. I don't know that we're even 5% of the way there. We're talking, so that's useful, and that's helpful. But we'll see what happens. Now, moving back on to this one again, going to now the lower right-hand corner. This is from the Washington Post this morning. Washington Post reports that the United States and Iran have developed a proposed framework extending the current ceasefire by 60 days while negotiations continue towards a broader agreement. The reported framework includes the phased reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, restoration of maritime traffic, and a halt in military operations across regional fronts, i.e. Lebanon. And Iran and the U.S. sources stress that no final agreement has been signed and the nuclear issues remain resolved. So even the Washington Post is saying, look, there's all kinds of stuff going on in here. We're way far away from anything. We're not even to the point yet where we can agree that there's 60 days, at least that number, it seems to be consistent on both sides. But then the conditions for that seem to still be miles apart. Now, let's take a look at what when they say the Strait of Hormuz, this is an important thing here. This is what we've gotten some clarity from the Iranian side here today on what they're talking about. So Foreign Ministry spokesman Bagai this morning said, listen, this is 4:43 our time this morning in Washington time. Iran's foreign ministry confirms that an environmental tax will be charged on ships. According to Bagai, there is no toll. People should use the correct terminology. Iran and Oman are currently drafting a new protocol. Under the new system, maritime services will be provided to protect the environment of the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, the Sea of Oman, which requires the collection of an environmental tax. We hope to reach an agreement with Oman on the matter soon. So because President Trump keeps saying there's not going to be a toll, there's no toll, they can't have it, they're not going to have control of it. And Iran says, yeah, no problem, there's no toll. It's an environmental tax. Apparently, there's some international law of the sea that says you can't charge a toll for international waterways, et cetera. And a portion of the Strait of Hormuz, especially that narrow point, goes out a pretty good amount from Oman and from Iran that cover a good portion of it. But there is still international waterways in between by every count. So to get around that, they just wordsmith. I don't know. I guess they've been paying attention to President Trump, and they said if he could just change the meaning of words, I guess we can too. Bottom line is they will say they retain complete control. Now, earlier today on Arabic English language news, Professor Morandi went on to give a little bit more depth of exactly what the Iranian side is saying about the Strait of Hormuz.
The Americans wanted the Strait of Hormuz to return to normal. Iran did not accept that. Iran said it will not return to normal. What will return to normal is the number of ships that pass through. And Iran will maintain control of the strait. That's the Iranians have said that is not something that it will accept to negotiate with the United States. This is something between Iran and Oman. The issue of fees, the issue of the security of the strait, that is not for negotiations.
So that's a pretty categorical statement. And that's something that the Iranian side has been saying from the beginning. They say once we had this, we never had this kind of leverage in the first 47 years, and we are not. He has told me many times, and by the way, Professor Morandi will be back on the show this week. Looking forward to that. As always, to get the view from the Iranian side, whatever we may think it's good, bad, or ugly, or right or wrong, we will always listen to both sides to find out what is the truth here and where is the possibility for mutual agreement to get this war over with permanently, because we really, really need that. That'll be coming later in the week. I do want to show you a couple of things here. This is part of the reason why President Trump says over and over, I'm in no hurry. He said that again this weekend. I got all the time in the world. I'm not worried about anything. He might want to start. He might want to start worrying about some things, because this is from Art Berman, who is an oil industry expert, whom I know we may have him on the show if we can manage that pretty soon. But he is really a decades-long expert in the oil industry, and he says, "Listen, Iran's negotiating. This is today. Iran's negotiating position has never been stronger in 47 years. It's leveraged compounds every day because oil inventories continue to drop. Europe will be at tank bottom in a month. The U.S. will in July. If Hormuz opened tomorrow," this is so important, "it would still take 6 months before things stopped getting worse." Not that in 6 months things would be better and that we'd be back to normal from the time that the deal is made, but then it will stop getting worse. It will finally stabilize. That's how long it will take to unwind this, just to stop the damage. But you see there that look, European storage is going to start tanking out in about a month, and then the U.S. will about a month after that. So one of the reasons why the price of oil has been able to be manipulated so easily is because all the flow that is stopped coming out of the Strait of Hormuz is mitigated by the release of strategic petroleum and other storage in places all around the world. You see now then everybody is sucking that down, so that minimizes the loss of, I think it's about 12 million net barrels of oil per day from all the sources that's lost on the global market. And so that even with these SPR releases, it's still not enough to equal 12, but it mitigates the damage such that the price of barrel has gone from, I think it was 65, 67, something like that before the war, up to hovering between, I think this morning it was 91, last I looked, and 100, which has been kind of bouncing around there. So it's still more, even with that delta, you see it still is causing the price of oil to be considerably higher than it was before. But once those SPRs run out, if the strait is not open, if we haven't even begun the process of unwinding that, then the damage is going to start compounding. And according to most experts that we've had, some of which have been on our show, there's going to be a spike in the price. And then it's not just going to be up to $1 and 20, 30 cents per week going up. It could be up 45, 75 cents in a week and continue to go north. And then there's no way to turn that back off. Once you've used up the SPRs, your leverage on to mitigating that price, and you can't manipulate it when there's not oil. You can manipulate the price when there's SPRs to release. You can't do it in the other case here. Now, I've told you already that, and we've had Mike Adams on the show, and his assessment is that we've already got baked in some starvation issues coming in because, again, the issues with the fertilizers has not coming out. That's you can't release fertilizer. There's no SPR for fertilizers. So that's a net loss, period. And that's a huge impact on agriculture around the world. And that problem is going to be manifest at harvest time later this year. That's already baked in. And he's concerned that the longer this goes, it may get into the next planting season. And then now you may have some starvation issues in some place around the world. And every expert I've talked to said that so far, we've already baked in a recession. You're not going to be able to avoid that. But there was an author on 60 Minutes last night. And you see that book in the corner there. He wrote this, and unfortunately, we can't show 60 Minutes for some reason. They always demonetize this, but you can go back and watch that. Andrew Ross Sorkin says that a massive crash is inevitable. And he was saying this, by the way, before the war started. This has only exacerbated that. So it's probably not just a recession. Now then, he's saying even without the war, that at some point, a depression, a Great Depression rivaling 1929, a crash is coming, was his message last night. So if President Trump doesn't want to deal with that and wants to even hope that that gets pushed off or possibly mitigated, he's got to get the strait opened quickly. And let me just categorically say, you're not going to get it done with military. It's not possible. If it was possible, we would already have done it in the first 40 days. All these weirdos, by the way, we're going to do a show this afternoon, probably around 3:30, I think. We're going to be looking at the American headwinds against a deal that Trump has to fight inside his own house. Forget about what the Iranian side is going to do, that are begging and lusting to go back to the war. We're going to talk about that this afternoon. But they're wrong. There's no military solution to this. And if he tries, then Iran has already stated that they're going to destroy oil infrastructure throughout the Gulf. And then it's almost like the floodgates for a depression will open up. So President Trump can't go down that path. He's going to have to go down a path of some kind of negotiated settlement or just the walk away theory. And with all this contradiction here, I wanted to bring on a friend of mine and a guest we've had on before, Rajan Menon. Gary, if you can bring him. There he is, who's currently a professor emeritus of international relations at the City College of New York and a very well-connected person who knows all the stuff. And he's actually got a piece out. Raj, I think it's this morning, right? That you have something.
Morning's Guardian, yes.
Yep, there it is right there. Yep, that's out this morning. Each side spins a different story about the U.S.-Iran peace talks, but Tehran may have the last word. What do you reveal in this article here, and what do you make about this spin that each side is telling us, and how is that going to get this to a situation where we can get the Strait of Hormuz back open?
Right. So my read, Danny, is that the Iranians have long since stopped taking President Trump's threat to use force seriously. I really don't.
Raj, I'm sorry. There's something. It sounds like you're in a bottom of a cave.
Can you hear me now?
Gary, you got any ideas here? Sorry about this, folks. We get the audio here fixed up. It sounds like you're muffled, like your hands over your.
Hold on one second.
Sorry, we'll get back on that in just a second. Raj, while you're trying to do that, Gary, I want to roll one more time. This is what Foreign Ministry spokesman Bagai has to say this morning about what Iran is willing to do.
Under the current circumstances, we have not planned any trip to Pakistan, nor any visit by a Pakistani delegation to Iran. The focus of the negotiations is on ending the war. At this stage, we are not discussing the details of the nuclear issue. It is true that we have concluded a large part of the topics under discussion. However, no one can claim that this means an agreement is imminent. We have not set a schedule or specific timeline for finalizing. Certainly, as the Islamic Republic of Iran, we will spare no effort to reach a result as soon as possible.
And yeah, so there he is just saying, listen, we're a long way from doing anything, but they do want to have a negotiated settlement. What do you say to that?
Sorry, Danny. Can you hear me now?
Unfortunately, it's the same. I guess we may have to can you just unplug the mic and maybe just go with what's on your laptop there, possibly?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, we'll get that in just a second. One last. That's the same. Actually, it's no different at all. Maybe can you try going out and coming back in and see if that does it with the other microphone? And in the meantime, there's one other soundbite here I wanted to show. This is from one of the military experts. Military advisors to the supreme leader in Iran. This morning, he issued. I think it was actually last night. That he issued a bit of a warning, but also a bit of a hope to what happens if we don't get a negotiated settlement, but that he still wants one.
About negotiation, the Islamic Republic has put the least costly path before you. The Islamic Republic is telling you that if you continue the war, we will make the American people miserable and the American economy miserable. Iran is here for a fair negotiation with you. So
look, they want a negotiated end. But they're saying that if this goes back to war, and of course, any time this could go back to conflict, we know from many of our sources on the ground in the Middle East that the U.S. has been locked and loaded for a long time. That in Israel, any time the war order could have been given, and President Trump himself claimed that last Tuesday they were ready to go and he was going to give the order, and then he didn't. And then I was told by some others that this past weekend, again, they had all but made the decision, and then they unmade it at the last minute. The Iranian side is saying, if you do all these things I kept warning you about, and he reiterated here, we're going to strike back in ways that you won't like, that'll be much more damaging. But, and then he ended on a positive note, we will have a negotiated settlement as long as there's something fair. And again, Iran is willing to give something in order to get something. So let's see if we have Raj back with us here. If it's, well, I guess we're just gonna have to go with that there. So it's about like it was, but we can hear you. So there's that.
Okay. Sorry.
So
this microphone is the bane of my existence.
So as best you can.
I think we really can't hear him at all. It's not. Yeah, it's that bad. It's that bad.
Okay.
Is there anything I can do with the settings, Gary? I got my mic plugged in. It shows.
It's on your end, Raj. I mean, I don't know how I could assist you, unfortunately.
Okay, hold on. Okay, we may have to do this another time then.
Yeah. Okay. Well, awfully sorry about that. Well, we'll look forward to getting that back. Awfully sorry, folks. But there was Russian men in back. Gary, if you can put that headline back up on there again, though, I do at least want to take a look at one of the things he had written there, because I thought it was really important here. If you can scroll up just a little bit there, he said the twists and the turns in the saga are bewildering, but Donald Trump appears to have the cards stacked against him. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. The United States has so much power. And again, when you look at it on a spreadsheet, we're overwhelming more than they do. I mean, we spent last year and this last fiscal year something around $1 trillion on our defense budget. They had maybe 12, 13 billion, something like that. Just a fraction of what we had. Their Air Force was antiquated. They only had a few aircraft. They do still have some. They actually have flown some sorties that actually hit one of our bases early on in this. Most of them they keep underground so that they can't be hit, but they also can't fly in there. If they do, they can get knocked down. Most of their normal surface fleet, 158 ships, has been destroyed across the board. So they've suffered a lot of damage, but they have the things that matter for this war. And that's what needs to understand. Wars are not fought on spreadsheets. If they were, we would have won the Vietnam War. If they were, we would have won the Afghanistan War. If they were, we would have won the the insurgency war, which kind of just petered away and then we ended up just leaving and saying, all right, y'all figured out we did the whole sons of the one with the Petraeus did there about, hey, how about we just pay you to go after these guys, the Shia, instead of us? And then we worked together with them, and that turned out to end that conflict there. Same situation here, except it's actually not the same. It's worse from our perspective, because the Taliban basically just had time. Their path, along with the North Vietnamese during the Vietnam War, was to just drain us of our resources and our interests. And of course, we're thousands of miles away. There was no self-evident security need of the United States. And then they just kind of, death by 1,000 cuts, just nickel and dimed it. The Taliban, they couldn't fight a conventional fight with this. They had to do the roadside bombs and just ambushes, et cetera. And then they just wore us out over 20 years. And it was about a decade in the Vietnam War. This one is different because Iran does have the capability of striking hard against our interests. And defensively, they have these whole mountain ranges, a series of mountain ranges on their entire western border, which makes them nearly impervious. Probably the reason why we tried to win this from the air only and not from a ground force, because we realized, we looked at a map, and we said, hey, this is never going to work. We said, oh, you know what? When you look at, oh, snap. Yeah, you look at Iraq on the left-hand side there. You see all that green? That's not actually underbrush. That's elevation, and it's nice and flat. And I can tell you with firsthand experience, because I drove up a lot of that and I drove around much more of it. But you see, Iran there is just the whole western side. The entire western side is covered. You see a majority of the country is covered in these all around. There's a plain there in the middle around just south of Tehran. Tehran itself nestles up into those mountains. But you see that there's no path to invade the country that you can take. There's no path in there. So we don't have that option. So we couldn't do that. So we tried to do something that was even less possible, because Iran took those same mountain ranges, the same thick granite, burrowed under over about a 20-year period, and they built these missile cities underneath, et cetera, that are nearly impervious to being taken out from any kind of bombs, even nuclear weapons. Some of them apparently are strong enough to even endure a nuclear blast. So you can't win it with air only. You can't even make a possibility of doing it on the ground. Then there's no military solution, folks. This is not that hard. It's not that hard to see, but that's where we are these days. And so President Trump has these issues that we just told you about here. There is some real clock ticking here. And the longer the clock ticks, the worse it's going to come here. From right now that you're at a recession here you're at a depression. And President Trump, I don't think that he understands this yet. They say that he's really good at markets, but he's good at looking at the indicators today. What is the market doing today? What can I say to adjust it? He's just got these myopic blinders on that all he looks at the market today. How can me and my rich friends benefit today? How can I make it look good for my supporters so that they keep supporting me today? Maybe he's looking as far as November, but even if he does that, even his closest allies can tell him it's going to be a bloodbath, man. You're gonna get slaughtered. It's either going to be a blue wave or a blue tsunami. No, it's probably one of those two. There's no scenario where, especially the House of Representatives, stays in Republican hands. I mean, it was razor thin margin as it is. You're certainly not going to get that, as unpopular as he is. But if you have a recession rolling in, and if you listen to the likes of Lindsey Graham and et al., and you try to go back, you're going to have oil prices way higher than they are now. And you can't manipulate those. And you also can't manipulate the price of gasoline, the price of diesel, and therefore everything else in America that's dependent upon transportation to get them to market any other product or to produce food, etc. That's why he's got to do what it takes right now to get this war off the table while he still can. If he doesn't do the walkaway theory and he does the bombs away plan instead, all those bad things I said are essentially guaranteed to get profoundly worse. All of them. And it's going to be a depression. In my estimation, my assessment from the fundamentals, not even, and then I hadn't even certainly seen this book, but just from the fundamentals I can see, it is as close to a guarantee of a depression as you can get if you bomb Iran and then they hit the oil infrastructure. It's just a mathematical calculation. You don't have enough energy to be able to keep the economy going where it was. You can't even maintain it. Forget about growth. It's going to be a drop of about 10%, and that equals a depression. So the only way President Trump can get that is to either do the walk away or to have a negotiated terms, and Iran is willing to do that. But we're going to have to give something to get something. So he's going to have to do something he has never done in office, and that's to have a negotiation to where we actually negotiate. We give and we get. And the terms that we would be able to get aren't good. That's the problem. That's why I've always said I don't think that he can have a negotiated settlement that Iran would agree to, because that would necessitate him accepting something that they want and giving them something, whether it's sanctions relief, whether it's release of the frozen funds, leaving them in control of the Strait of Hormuz, whether it's a toll or a tax, whatever the word you want to use. Everyone will see that. And then, of course, there's the issue of Israel. Didn't even mention that yet. But the whole issue there, one of the things that I think in that first one we put up here, where the Iranian side said that the end of the war on all fronts, that primarily means Lebanon. In Israel, we've seen the last time when we tried to have the first part of this ceasefire, it was also supposed to include Lebanon. And Israel said, oh, how about this? How about we have the biggest bombing we've ever had in Lebanon to just reinforce we ain't doing that. Now, subsequently, they went to a limited quasi ceasefire. They apparently didn't hit Beirut, but they are still hitting other places in there, and they always claim self-defense, whatever. They've invaded the country, so that you've forfeited that right to claim that anyway. But the question is, that basically gives Israel a veto. Will they play it and say, we're not going to stop fighting in Lebanon? Remember, they got their troops on the ground in Lebanon, so they would have to withdraw back to their side to make that into a ceasefire on all fronts. Or at least they would have to go silent on the guns, and certainly they don't want to do this. There's a big fight inside Israel, inside Netanyahu's inner circle, that are screaming to expand the war in Lebanon. So what if they keep going down that path? Meaning that even if the U.S. and Iran could come to an agreement on everything, Iran is not budging on that ceasefire on all fronts. That was the first point that they made there. So if Israel vetoes that and says, nope, we're going to keep fighting, will Trump just walk away? He never has so far. But you see all of the roadblocks and all the headwinds against this. That's why we're in such a difficult time. And it seems that he's likely aware that what going back and bombing is going to mean for the economy. So it seems like he wouldn't do that, but he's also undercutting his own path to getting the war off the table. So we remain in this dangerous situation to where ration and logic aren't going to be what makes the deal here. If it was, we would already have either walked away or made a negotiated settlement on the best terms we could get. But he could also do the irrational. Doesn't make any sense. It would harm him. It would harm our country. It would harm his political standing. It would harm everything. And he still might do it. That's the danger, because it's not rational. We'll have to wait and see. It's going to work out. We'll have to wait and see how the Israeli side is. We're going to be back this afternoon, though, and show you if the Israeli side has some headwinds in that. We'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon as well. But I'm going to show you the headwinds he's got in his own party and how hard it is for him to do the right thing or even exercise the desires that he has without all this extra headwind. We'll see you then at 3:30 and on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You know, I don't try to talk you into buying gold or
check the microphones levels, because I try to do it. Sometimes it doesn't, we don't know what's going on with the program. Sometimes
Right.
it levels up it evens the level of the mic, but sometimes it doesn't work. Please
How does
check
that
out if,
does that sound all right or not?
yeah, it's good. It's good.
Okay.
Yeah. Larry, let me start with the latest news that the Iranian delegation is the head of the parliament, together with the head of the Central Bank of Iran and the foreign minister of Iran. They're in Qatar. It's about the Iranian frozen assets. What do we know? And Donald Trump had a long post on his Truth Social. I don't know, he was telling us a huge story about how amazing the deal is, and he's making the deal. Some countries are not happy with that. Some countries are part of this. And one of the amazing thing that he mentioned is that Iran is going to be part of the Abraham Accord. What is happening here? The guy is just losing everything. What is your understanding of the current situation between Iran and the United States? We're going to talk about other issues, but when it comes to the deal, when it comes to the negotiations between Iran and the United States, what's going on?
Well, Iran is engaged in the negotiations. It's the United States that's negotiating against itself. That's the problem, because you've got this Zionist lobby that's just going crazy. When word of this leaked out on Saturday, and I wrote about it last night, across the board, the reaction, it was extremely negative. So Trump faces an uphill slog there. Then the Israeli cabinet's not at all cooperative. They're not going, oh, great, this is good news. So they're opposed to it. I just think Trump's buying time until Eid is over, and then he's going to attack again. It's insane, but they keep the way that different terms are presented in the press. That 1 minute it appears that Iran's going to have to wait to get sanctions relief, and then on the other hand, the sanctions relief is imminent. The assets are going to be frozen or unfrozen. No, they're going to stay frozen. Eve Smith pointed something out to me that I had neglected to consider, and I think she's exactly right. Trump does not unilaterally have the means to lift all sanctions, because some of those sanctions have been imposed by acts of Congress. So Trump can't just say, oh, well, screw it, I'm not going to follow that. I mean, it's going to have to get Congress to lift those sanctions. So this process is a lot more complicated than it would appear. What is certain is Iran at least knows what it wants, and Iran is going to stick to those fundamental positions. It's not going to. It's going to insist upon sanction relief and the return of the frozen assets. And if to the extent that Doha, I didn't realize Doha might have been involved with it on the sanctions side, freezing assets. The other place you'd have to go would be into Dubai, to the United Arab Emirates. I'm sure that they've got a substantial amount of Iranian assets potentially frozen. I think this is just a lull, unfortunately. I don't see there's not the political momentum in the United States to say, let's stop the war, let's find a solution. It's still that basically Iran's going to have to do whatever the hell we tell them or else. That's still the attitude. So until that attitude changes, I don't see any fundamental change going forward with, particularly these countries signing on to the Abraham Accords. Not going to happen. The Israelis have proven to be too brutal. And, right now in Israel, they're fighting amongst themselves. Just overnight, Ben-Gvir is insisting that they got to start blowing up every building in Lebanon. And, when Bibi Netanyahu thinks that's too extreme, that tells you how crazy things are. Netanyahu reportedly pushed back and said, we're not going to do that. You're going, good God, where did he finally, find a conscience? So this is, it's disarray. It's more market manipulation. The markets that are open, they're not open in the States today because it's a holiday, Memorial Day. But the other commodity markets around the world that are open, this drove down the price of oil. Oh, peace is at hand. It's not at hand. But, this whole charade surrounding market manipulation, it's sure making somebody a lot of money.
Yeah. And it seems that the frozen assets in Qatar is something like $11 billion, and they're to talk about this. And Larry, do you think that it seems that Qatari delegation went, it was the night before last night, they went to Iran to talk with Iran, and it was part of this negotiation on Iranian frozen assets, or it was something beyond that?
No, I think it's something beyond that. I think so. Pakistan is working furiously behind the scenes to construct they're the lead for China and for Russia to construct a new security architecture in the Persian Gulf. What I'm told is that both Qatar and Saudi Arabia are just basically sick and tired of the United States. They think being in this relationship with the United States has created more risk for them, more cost. So they just as soon get out from under that. And so those discussions underway in terms of who's going to do what, how will the security of these various countries be guaranteed, and it gets into economic security as well. So there's a lot that's going on. The good news is they're talking. The fact that this senior Iranian delegation went to Qatar to talk to the leaders there, because Qatar, of all the countries in the Persian Gulf, I think Qatar has suffered the most physical damage to its economic infrastructure, much more than Saudi Arabia, because some of the aluminum plant and the facilities for liquid natural gas, those have been severely damaged, and it's not a matter of months of repairs, it's potentially years of repairs ahead of them just to get back online. So they're suffering a cash loss right now. So this, ignore what Donald Trump is saying, because he's all over the board and does not yet have a clear plan. One minute he wants to blow up Iran, and the next minute he says he wants them to sign up with the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, the thing that you mentioned about Smotrich, he's talking about you have to bring down 10 buildings in Dahia, for example, in Beirut, in response to every drone. Here is the question: what are these drones doing to Israel that they're so desperate when it comes to these drones? And 10 buildings, in response to one drone, what is that?
Well, the drones we got Hezbollah are both destroying tanks, armored vehicles, and killing soldiers in large numbers. Israel's suffering more casualties in this war with Hezbollah than it did in 2006. I think substantially more. And in terms of loss vehicles and such, I think it exceeds what they lost in the fighting in Gaza. Israel keeps very close hold of the casualty figures, but I'd be willing to say that, in fact, I think Israel has sustained more casualties in this last 6 months of fighting with Hezbollah than they did in the previous 3 years in Gaza.
Yeah. Here is what the spokesperson of Iranian Foreign Ministry said, that there are no tolls and will be no tolls in the Strait of Hormuz, but ships have to pay an environmental protection fee in a joint system.
Yeah, no, it's a word game. You also call it tolls. They say, no, it's not tolls. It's just a usage fee. It's like if you go to Las Vegas now, you have to pay a resort fee. It's an extra tax, but they call it a resort fee.
Yeah. By the way, the Chinese used that. You remember before Donald Trump, the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi, they used that term. It's a environmental sort of fee that we're paying to Iran. Larry, Donald Trump, it seems that he's putting pressure on GCC countries to normalize their relationship with Israel.
Yes.
I don't know if that is achievable at this particular time, because the war is not over, in my opinion, and we may have some new escalations in the region, and he's putting pressure. If you want to have a deal between Iran and the United States, you have to improve or normalize your relationship with Israel. How is that going to help Israel? How is that going to work? I don't see that happening, because we know their position even before this war started. They said without a Palestinian state, there would be no there would be no improvement in the relationship they have with Israel, if any, at this particular moment.
Well, yesterday, or it was the day before yesterday, when Trump had that phone call with all the Gulf Arabs and Turkey and Egypt, and brought up the whole issue of, hey, so we'll all sign on to the Abraham Accord, right? Yeah. There were crickets. Nobody said a word. It's like, okay, don't tell him to, bug off. He'll go into a rage. Just say nothing. And said, oh, that's interesting. It's not going to happen. The time for the Abraham Accords has come and gone, and with the slaughter of, it was probably more than 100,000 Palestinian men, women, and children easily. I don't see any of the governments in the Gulf, with maybe the exception of the United Arab Emirates, having the stomach to do that.
No. If you were to mention, Larry, the difficulties you're facing right now, is that putting an end to the war on all fronts? Is that going to be the Strait of Hormuz? Is that going to be the Iranian nuclear program? Because today morning, we've learned from Iranian Foreign Ministry that the focus right now is on ending the war on each and every front, which we know that's impossible with Israeli government, with Benjamin Netanyahu, with what they're doing. As we talk, they're bombing Lebanon. Right. They're bombing Gaza. They're hitting people in the West Bank.
Yeah, no, look, that I think has been one of the, let's call it, inflexible Iranian demands. It's not just a matter of, okay, you're going to stop attacking us. You're going to stop attacking Lebanon. You're going to stop attacking the Palestinian people. And the United States is in a position to stop that. We pull the plug completely on Israel. But politically, that's not going to happen. Trump's not going to do that. So that means the war against the Palestinians and the Lebanese, that is going to continue. Israel may scale it back a little bit, but remember Trump's boast that he controls Netanyahu, and he tells him to stop bombing in Lebanon. By God, they'll stop bombing in Lebanon. And what's Israel been doing ever since? They've been bombing every day in Lebanon. So, unless Trump actually gets serious and orders the Department of War, Department of State, cut the aid, pull it back, withdraw forces. withdraw advisors. Then that might get Israel's attention, and the United States could force an agreement. If the fighting stopped and the Israelis started to, basically were willing to recognize a Palestinian state, then I think an Abraham Accord is possible, but that's not going to happen. Israel is the Zionists who are talking about, they're still talking about they'd like to provoke a new round of fighting with Iran and then take advantage of that to blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque and blame it on Iran, hoping that would provoke a war between Iran and the rest of the Arab Muslim world, and then free the way so that Israel can go build the third temple. I mean, this entire thing is just so ridiculous. I don't know how familiar you are with the Torah, the Old Testament, as Christians call it, but when the children of Israel escaped Egypt, they were warned, don't make any graven images. Don't make something physical that you worship physically. That was the command. And then when Moses goes up to get the 10 Commandments and comes down, they had made a golden calf and they were worshiping the golden calf, and he broke what had been sort of version 1 of the commandments and went up to get version 2. But my point in all of this is that when you get into the book of Deuteronomy, it's about, okay, you're going to build this temple and it's going to have this kind of silk and all this gold, and you're going to have this on gilded. And I mean, it's detailed about building a graven image. So that's why I said, I would tell the Jews and the Christians, your God is pretty damn confused. Because on the one hand, he claims, don't make any graven images. And then he spends an entire chapter like an architectural digest. Hey, build this and garnish this and carry this Ark of the Covenant around. And so it's like all graven image. So it's just, and what's so sad about this is people still believe this crap. And based upon that, are willing to kill other human beings in pursuit of this graven image, which their God supposedly told them never to build. So, sorry, it's just stuff like that drives me crazy, because you'll get sane, rational people, educated people say, the temple, we're going to bring among the religious Jews. They'll be, we built, get the temple, man, the Messiah comes. And the Christians say, you already killed him once. You want him to come back? So that's where we get in all this eschatological belief, and the Muslims have theirs. I wish, my own feeling with respect to religion is, if you believe that God is the creator of all life, then respect that everybody that's around you is also part of God's creation. Treat them as such. Okay? Stop killing each other, starving each other, persecuting each other. That's enough. Sorry. That's your religious lesson for today.
Larry, Donald Trump said in his latest post, he says maybe 1 or 2 countries don't want to have this deal between the United States and Iran. Who are those countries? He's talking about Israel and UAE, basically.
No, actually, I think he's talking more about Iran and I'm not sure who else would take your pick. Qatar, Saudis. I think the Saudis are still willing to cut a deal with Israel. They've never been a principled lot in terms of watching them over the years. Again, Trump is indulging a fantasy, because the ingredients for an agreement are there. but it's going to require the United States to accept some concessions that the Zionist crowd will not tolerate. So I don't see how he bridges that gap. I don't see him being strong enough to tell them, "Oh, shut up! I'm ignoring you." I don't see him doing that.
Yeah, I think Lindsey Graham said that. He posted that it's going to be whatever is happening between Iran and the United States, the outcome is disastrous for Israel. But there is no way to change the reality for Israel.
Right.
How can Donald Trump change it? There is no way. What is that? So what would be the solution in the mind of these people like Lindsey Graham?
Well, look, and that's the other element to this. People think this is just Bibi. The problem is Bibi Netanyahu. If we just get rid of Bibi, boy, everything would be great. You get rid of Bibi, you still got the Zionist problem. And at the extremists that are represented by the likes of Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, they unfortunately are a very strong minority. But when you tie them together with other elements of Likud, the conservatives, they still are the majority voice in Israel. So it's not that you're moving away from extremism. You've got the extremism is dominant. So like I said, Bibi goes away, the policies aren't going to change dramatically. The problem Israel has right now is its own limitations on its military power. This, despite its claim that we're the strongest, the best in the region. I think the total manpower, if they called up all the reservists, it'd be 400,000. I think right now they're getting by with keeping 90,000 active, and that's stretching them. And in tandem with that, we're seeing a rise in suicide. So you've got not just traumatic brain injury, but this murdering of civilians and children is taking a toll. There are still many Israeli soldiers that do have a conscience, that do have a good sense of right and wrong, and then they're haunted with these images of what they're doing to these people. Now there are some within the Israeli ranks that are completely inhuman. They don't care. They'll rape and murder because they enjoy it. It is I just saw that there was like a U.S. citizen who'd gone over to fight, and he just came back and he committed suicide as soon as he got back stateside. So, look, this is consistent with what happened to the German Wehrmacht, the German army, when they invaded Poland and then proceeded into Ukraine and began engaging in these mass executions of Jews along the way. One of the pressures that led to the development of, if you will, gas chambers, other ways to do mass extermination, was because these soldiers were having mental breakdowns. The regular army was being affected by it. You had to really have this army of fanatics that would engage in this kind of conduct. And so you're seeing the same kind of phenomena now among the Israeli Defense Force. So this is, and trying to fight a war in Gaza, a war in the West Bank. They haven't called it a war, but that's what it is. And then a war in southern Lebanon, and where Hezbollah's capabilities have been dramatically enhanced, and the use of these first FPV drones are causing significant damage.
Let's assume Donald Trump decides to leave, the Middle East. Where is Israel today compared to what it was before? And if they continue with this attitude of attacking Lebanon, of attacking Syria, attacking Gaza, how long can they sustain these sort of attacks?
No, they can't do it without, the U.S. has to be there fully supporting them. Without U.S. support, Israel can sustain this. It's that simple. Their economy is already declining. Remember, and this is 3 years without regular tourist income. It used to be Israel was a big tourist destination for a lot of Christians, that's dried up. That is just a shadow of what it used to be, and then the physical damage they've suffered from the missile attacks. So the rebuilding going on, perhaps, but there's also reports that an increasing number of professionals, scientists, and such, they're leaving Israel. They're going for other places, Cyprus, for example. So they're not staying in Israel. So Israel's suffering, a loss of personnel, not just from the war, but just people deciding to abandon it, a declining economy. So if the United States pulls the plug, Israel has no future.
Larry, the logic that usually the casualties or the suffering in the aftermath of the wars for the soldiers, for the troops, are more than what it was during the war. How is that gonna, I would say, considering what has happened so far with Israel, is that gonna have some sort of, is that gonna bring some sort of huge, I don't know, huge influence on Israeli army? I'm not talking about the society. How is that going to be how the army is going to be influenced by the war in terms of because we know we had the reports about the Israeli army is collapsing and they have the problem with manpower, but how is that going to influence the body of the army in Israel?
Well, despite all the Western propaganda, the Israeli army is not a professional army. It's a reserve army, and it is poorly led, poorly disciplined, and is not, in my view, not really worthy of being called a professional military, because they engage in such heinous criminal acts that are. It's not isolated instances. It is widespread, and even getting down to the rape and debasement of your prisoners. So the creation of the Geneva Convention was a creation. There we go, got it out. In the aftermath of World War II, to try to correct and prevent the horrors that took place in World War II, the mass extermination of populations, the number of criminal acts that were committed against civilians, to try to ensure that there's some protection for civilians, that there was some sense of a rule of law. Well, we're now in the process of destroying the Geneva Conventions. Essentially has been destroyed, and the destruction has taken place over the last started probably 10 years ago in the Donbass, where the Ukrainian forces murdered civilians in Crimea, in Odessa in particular, and then proceeded to bomb and shell civilians in Luhansk and Donetsk. And, it's gone on. Here's the United States. We see somebody in a boat in the Caribbean. We say, oh, they're a drug dealer. We blow them up. We kill them. No due process. They don't represent, under any kind of international law, they don't represent an imminent threat. And yet we say we're going to kill them. And so it's not, I don't want to single out Israel and pretend Israel's just the bad guy here. Hell, the United States is the worst in terms of what we do. And we always wrap it with a cloak of morality, as if, see, we're so much better. We're enlightened beings. We know what's good, what's right, what's holy. And yet, we've got a track record, unfortunately, of just killing way too many civilians. So the international law is out. And Israel, as its defense chief, testified before the the national security team in Israel about 5 weeks ago, as reported by Alistair Crook and Asleen, his wife. It was, he said, hey, we can't keep this up. We're broken. And they can't. But there's been no movement evidence since then to back off and to seek another way.
Here is Ben-Gvir he says that Israel must not normalize the reality of explosive drones. The time has come for the prime minister to bang on Trump's table and tell him Israel is returning to war in Lebanon. We need to cut off Lebanese electricity and seize the Zahrani area and return it. He's basically saying that we have to start the war again.
Yeah.
We have a full-scale war, and we have to start it, and because of the drones. And is that going to be part of the, because right now the two sides are negotiating. It seems that Israel is just moving to the direction of full attack on Lebanon to sabotage everything.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know what Donald Trump would do, and we haven't seen that sort of backbone when it comes to Israel from the Trump administration.
Well, it's all predicated on dehumanizing Hezbollah, dehumanizing the Lebanese people, dehumanizing the Palestinians. As long as they're no longer really human beings, these are terrorists. Then you're entitled to do whatever you want to them. And, that's why I wrote a couple of days ago, because I watched that debate that took place last Wednesday between John Mearsheimer, Stephen Walt on one hand, and our own version of Ben-Gvir, Mike Pompeo. Pompeo used to be fat like Ben-Gvir, but now, so he's thinned up.
Mm.
But, he's still a vicious bigot, in my view, along with Victoria Nuland. And throughout that, he kept talking about the thousands of Israelis that have been killed by Hezbollah. So, I said, that doesn't sound right. Let's get the actual numbers. The actual numbers are fewer than, since 1982, in terms of, quote, Hezbollah attacks, fewer than 1,000 Israelis have been killed by Hezbollah, but by the same token, Israel has killed over, conservatively, 92,000 Palestinians. Now, that goes with, people say, well, they've killed far more in Gaza. I'm saying let's go with the numbers that the Israeli Defense Forces themselves accepted of 73,000. Now, I agree. I think the number is far higher. But what we can agree upon, at least, even the Israelis concede they've killed close to 100,000 Palestinians in the last 44 years, going back to 1982. That means for every dead Israeli, there's 100 dead Palestinians. And then, Mike Pompeo wanted to call Hezbollah monsters. Look at the numbers. Who's the monster? Real clear. Those who kill the most people are the monster. Very simple. We don't need to make this complicated.
Here is what CNN just reported, Larry, that Saudi Arabia rejects Trump normalization demand and insists on Palestinian statehood. And this is the, we just talk about it. And I don't see Saudi Arabia going that way. And they know what has happened so far. They have sacrificed, they participated, they helped Israel and the United States in this war against Iran. And I don't see that, because if they do that, the population, the public opinion gonna crush them, in my opinion.
Yeah, blew up in their face. They had. I don't doubt that Mohammed bin Salman was, privately telling Trump, "Yeah, okay, yeah, we got, go get Iran, get rid of that, the mullahs, and we'll all be good." I think on February 27th, there wasn't a single leader in the Persian Gulf, that believed that Iran could withstand the full attack of the United States and Israel. I don't think they had any appreciation of the potential success of a decapitation strike. But I think they widely assumed that this would be the end of Iran. And when that didn't take place, and Iran immediately began firing back and immediately began attacking U.S. military infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in the UAE, that was sort of an eye-opening moment of revelation for the Gulf Arabs. And like, holy smokes, the United States said they're going to protect us. How's that protection going? It's not, it's not. So they, I think now the Saudis have come to the realization being aligned with the United States is not a net positive, it's a net negative. And the offer that's being presented via Russia and China, with Pakistan taking the lead in presenting this, I think is significant. In fact, I was told that I learned yesterday that reportedly the Pakistan has offered a nuclear deal with the Saudis in order to protect Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia be under a nuclear umbrella of Pakistan. So that may be further
against Israel.
Yes, yeah. Because I was talking to somebody, said, "Well, why would Saudis need that? Who has a nuclear weapon that would attack them?" And I went, "Seriously, you're asking that?" Let me see. It begins with an I. Yeah, Israel. So the Saudis now have a guaranteed nuclear umbrella against Israel. The Saudis let the Israelis know, you attack us, you're going to get blasted with a nuke by Pakistan. That gives the Israelis something else that they have to worry about.
Larry, how do you define the role of Pakistan? We know that they have good relationship with the United States, with China, with Iran, and how did you find the foreign policy so far? They're right now in China talking about what's going on between Iran and the United States.
Right.
I assume China knows everything, each and every dimension of the talks.
Yeah. So Pakistan and Iran they got at least a shared interest in controlling the Baluchis. Now, this is a point I made in a couple of commentary yesterday, and need to emphasize it here again. 2 days ago, you had a terrorist attack inside Pakistan on a passenger train, killed at least 24. Initially, I heard it was 100, but at least 24, and injured many more. And that was by the Baluchistan Liberation Army, BLA. Which country in the world has had a covert intelligence relationship with Baluchi independence groups that goes back, say, 46, 47 years? That would be Israel. And one of the Israeli plots got exposed a few years back, where two Mossad assets, intelligence officers, they went into Baluchistan claiming to be American CIA and walking around with money and say, and they recruited all these people to carry out terrorist attacks in Iran. And they were using you. And so these Baluchis thought that they were working for the Americans. And it was so when that got exposed, it became actually a pretty big deal. There was a lot of pushback. Do you think that this terrorist attack that took place 36 hours ago in Pakistan was just a coincidence? I mean, here's Pakistan now playing a leading role in negotiating a new security architecture for the region, and that this Baluchi group just happens to carry out a terrorist attack inside Pakistan, kill Pakistanis. I don't believe that. I believe that this group was working in tandem with Israeli intelligence. And that's why they carried this out as a warning to Pakistan. Keep this up, there's going to be more of the same. Now, there's no denying that the current head of the Pakistani military, that they were basically helped put in office, the ousting Imran Khan was with the help of the United States. So in that sense, Pakistan has had an alliance with the United States, but Pakistan's alliance with China is stronger. It does have a history of cooperating with the United States on intelligence issues, like U-2 flights going back over 70 years. But in terms of being aligned, getting weapons, getting intelligence that was used against India, that comes from China. So China's influence in Pakistan is significant, and because Pakistan does have, lines of communication open with Iran, they're in a natural position that they can talk to. They're Sunni, but they do share a common security interest with Iran. In fact, the story was about a couple of years back. There were attacks on the Baluchi positions, both in Iran and in Pakistan. And apparently the Iranians allowed the Pakis to come into Iran to attack the Baluchi positions, and the Pakistanis allowed the Iranians to go into Pakistan to attack the Baluchi positions. So they're actually coordinating, on a cross-border security effort that hasn't, eliminated Baluchistan's desire for their own independence. But those, at least in that, Pakistan and Iran are cooperating. My understanding is Pakistan has convinced Qatar, Saudi Arabia to basically separate themselves from the United States. So this statement today by Saudi Arabia is so emphatic about, no, we're not normalizing with Israel. Not going to happen until the Palestinian people have a state and their rights are protected.
I think for the strategy of GCC countries, there are two important impacts. One of them was the Israeli attack on Doha. You remember, they went with 15 fighter jets going over Saudi Arabia and hitting some targets in Doha and getting back without having any sort of difficulties. And then the war in the Middle East between the United States and Iran with with what has happened with American bases. These are two important factors in the mind of those people, the leadership in GCC countries. And they have to find some sort of solution. And, I don't know, Pakistan going to be part of that? Maybe in the future, there would be some sort of understanding between Iran and GCC countries, because they see Israel as a threat, as a serious threat to these countries. It's not about Iran. And I don't know if Iran wants to have any sort of conflict with these countries, because they have been used during the war to attack Iran, to kill. And many people, Larry, to be honest, looking at the situation right now in Iran, the people, ordinary people, they don't want to forgive these countries for what they've done in this war against Iran. This is the reality of the Iranian society, putting aside the Iranian government.
Yeah, no, look, this... right now, we're waiting to see what's going to happen this week. I personally believe that the current hiatus in attacks on Iran is because of Eid and the Hajj. Because the Saudis, I think even the crazies in the Trump administration recognize that if they carried out attacks now against Iran and use Saudi airspace and Saudi assets, that Iran would retaliate in a way that would be devastating for Saudi Arabia. And that would reinforce the fact that hanging out with the United States just makes you a bullet magnet. So Trump and the team have decided, they've not turned aggressive. I know that there are the U.S. soldiers that normally, the U.S. military personnel that normally are managing what are called these crisis action teams. They've all been basically on vacation. It's a holiday. It's a 3-day holiday here in the United States. They were told, be prepared to report in an hour. You'd be on an hour string to get back to work, but they haven't been recalled. So from that standpoint, the U.S. military has basically stood down for the Memorial Day weekend. Question is, how long will that continue? Is the planning? They've already got the plans in place. They know what targets they want to attack, how they're going to attack them. The issue is, can they have overflight rights over Saudi Arabia? The Saudis are the key. You think back to that attack on Qatar. The Israelis couldn't have done that without Saudi knowledge and cooperation. Or let me put it this way. If they overflew Saudi Arabian territory without seeking overflight permission, then that would have been a further insult to the Saudis and a clear violation of their sovereignty, because there's no way you can attack into Doha without flying over Saudi Arabia from Israel. And I think that distance is like 800 miles, which means you're going to have a KC-135 up in the air refueling these aircraft. They don't make it to Doha on their own and then fly back. No, they got to be refueled at least twice. So that's what I said. This is we didn't get a lot of details about Saudi knowledge or complicity with that attack in Doha, but now clearly they don't want any part of this going forward. And that, I learned last week that U.S. air refueling activity has been shifted largely into Iraqi territory, because Iraq didn't have an air defense, so we can do basically what we want there. But we saw even during the first 3 weeks, there are units on the, Iranian-supported units on the ground in Iraq that have surface-to-air missiles that can't fire and bring down a KC-135. They did it once, and so they could conceivably do it again. So there's, a lot of unknowns at this point.
Yeah. Larry, it's been a while we didn't talk about Ukraine, but there is something going on there. Russia is so angry about what has happened. The attack on, civilians, school, college girls. They attacked the dormitory.
High school.
It was high school.
Yeah.
Then, so we had the Russian response. They used Oreshnik, if I'm not mistaken. And
yeah, the Oreshnik was reportedly used on a military air base that is southwest of Kyiv. Iskanders, Kinzhals, other major missiles were used in Kyiv itself, causing significant damage, both to government buildings, the factories, and I saw today that Russia has reissued a warning that to Westerners that basically you should get the hell out of Kyiv. I think you're going to see now a continued onslaught that the capital is going to become unlivable. They're not going to attack. Again, the Russians are being careful not to attack civilian targets. They're wanting to be sure that they're hitting military targets. But this attack that took place in the it's monstrous, because these 70% of the dead were girls. The other 30% were young men or boys. They're under 18. This was not a military target by any definition, and the Russians' reaction to their outrage and response to this is deep, very deep, and they're not letting it go. So I think the war in Ukraine has now entered a new phase. with, and then that phase includes the possibility, or maybe the increased probability of strikes on European territory, in the Baltics, in Romania, in Poland, in Germany. Any factories, any industrial activities involved with producing drones that are used to attack inside Russia, they will be a target now. I think that's been made pretty clear by Ambassador Polyansky, the U.S. rep to Russia's rep to the OSCE, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybkov. I think Peskov has said something. Maria Zakharova, she's been equally forceful. So I think when the foreign ministry is signaling basically, we're turning the page. We're into a new chapter here. It's they better pay attention.
Is Europe getting more radical toward Russia? Because when this war started, it was all about Ukraine is winning, Ukraine is hitting Russia, is defeating Russia on the battlefield. Right now, it seems that they're getting more radical. They want to be part of the fight.
Yeah.
They want to escalate the situation. I don't know how prepared Europe is today, considering what has happened in the Middle East and how depleted is the stockpile of the United States, because we've learned about the THAAD system, all of that, the reports, and how Europe going to be able, how is that going to be possible for Europe to participate or to escalate the war against Russia?
Well, you definitely have a disconnect between what the leaders are saying and what the people are saying. Based on opinion polls, public opinion, they have zero interest in going to war with Russia. If you listen to the statements of Merz, Macron, Starmer, they're keen. And Stubb, this clown out of Finland, and they're keen on going to war with Russia. They have no idea what they're getting into, and that's where Russia's been firm, coming back saying, it's gotten to the point that even where Sergei Karaganov, has openly talked about, we're going to have to use nukes against Europe in order to convince them that they can't continue to threaten us like this and threaten us with war without paying a consequence. They need to learn that there is a real consequence to be paid. So, I see. I don't see Vladimir Putin on his own going down that road, but the pressure is the public opinion in Russia is growing to the point they would demand and support that. Medvedev was very clear in his comments the other day that what happened 2 days ago now in Ukraine, that needs to happen every day. That volume of missiles and attacks on Kyiv until the Ukrainians surrender. So there's growing. I think we're reaching the point where measured restraint is going out the window, and Russia is going to exercise and employ more force.
How about the air defense system of Ukraine? What do they have? Is that the Patriot system?
Yeah. What was that word you used? Air defense? Yeah, they don't have one.
Yeah.
Gone. It's ineffective. Patriot is an ineffective system to start with, particularly against ballistic and cruise missiles. It might take down some drones, but that's about it. But they're out. Israel's the air defense system of the United States, based upon Patriot, has drained. It is, running on empty. So it's not like they got a good stockpile that they can roll out. They don't have that. They've already cannibalized stockpiles in Indo-PACOM, in the Pacific, in order to bolster the capability to try to restore capabilities in the Persian Gulf and Israel, in vain, because the most of the Iranian ballistic missiles defeat the U.S. PAC-3s and David Sling, the Israelis as well.
Larry, those drones that Ukrainians are using against Russia are produced in the United Kingdom. Who's producing them?
I don't know. We've heard allegations. Some are produced in the UK, some are produced in Germany, some are produced in Poland, Romania. But I don't have any firm information to say, oh yeah, I can point at this country. But the Russians apparently do. And so, like I said, they put the Europeans on notice that this is not going to go unanswered.
Yeah. Do you see the day that Russia would attack American bases in European countries?
If the United States gets involved with an attack that kills Russian civilians or children, like happened the other day, clear evidence of that, yeah, then in that case, yes. I think Russia is fed up, or a growing number of Russians are fed up with what they see as the duplicity of the United States in this, enabling attacks on Russia while trying to deny Russia the ability to protect itself.
We've seen the role of Starlink, Larry, in Iran, against Iran and against Russia. One of the main reasons that these Ukrainian drones are able to attack Russia deep inside Russian territory is satellite, this internet that comes from Starlink. And there should be some sort of responsibility for those people who are providing this sort of support for these, I would say, terrorist acts of the Ukrainian army. Is that going to be discussed in a bigger picture? Because if you have something like Starlink and you provide, it's a satellite using, internet, but after all, if you can use it to overthrow the governments, make some sort of chaos, huge casualties, civilians being killed by these sort of access. What is that? What is that? And who's responsible for that?
Well, ultimately in this case, Elon Musk is responsible for that. What you have is the Russians have the capability to take those satellites out. Now, I think one reason the Russians have hesitated to start destroying satellites is it would open them to a similar response from the United States. Now, then when you get into a space war where each side is starting to destroy the other satellites, it gets dangerous because taking out those satellites then reduces communication. And then with lack of communication, you get more unknown uncertainty and the greater chance for a mistake to escalate very quickly. What's interesting is Elon Musk's dad, Errol, he's made several trips to Russia now. I was with him about a year ago, and he's been quite taken with it. So maybe the Russians are hoping that they can work some magic through Errol to get the Elon to back off. But it is, I saw within the last 2 or 3 weeks, the Russians were announcing they had tested and successfully fielded an improved weapon system for taking out satellites. They got it.
Yeah, it's a sign for Elon Musk.
Yeah, well, Elon's moving into the sort of a new business area.
Yeah.
That right now, if you use a cell phone, you're basically dependent upon a cell phone tower. But he has purchased bandwidth through a company called EchoStar, and in theory, he could be offering a new form of cell phones. It's like satellite. It's not like they used to have satellite phones. You could buy them, but God, they were expensive. So you had to be a wealthy corporation or a government to afford it. But now he's talking about using the Starlink system to handle phone calls. So all of a sudden, you don't have to worry about a cell tower being anywhere around. You're going to have full. If your phone connects to to a satellite, you can go anywhere and be connected. So that's what's coming. That's the future. And so in that kind of future, then you get to different kinds of military applications. Because think about it. If you've got a cell phone, right now they can locate somebody using cell phone towers. Well, what happens if you're using satellite? You can be located anywhere in the world. Creates some interesting security considerations. I'm talking about personal security.
Larry, with this beautiful hat you put on, I want to talk about Cuba, which is important. And it seems that Donald Trump, as time goes by, and he feels that he cannot get anything good for his position out of the war in the Middle East, he's going to do something against Cuba. What would that be, in your opinion?
I have no idea. So if we send troops ashore, let's call it a new Bay of Pigs, Bahia de los Cochinos, and oust the existing government. Okay. Then what? We, the United States, have to take over that government. Well, you're going to impose military rule? They need to think this thing through, because on the Cuban side, they have thought it through. They do have, there are still ardent supporters of Cuba and communism, and they've got Cuba was born in a guerrilla war out of the Sierra Madre Mountains. They've got caches up there, hideouts, weapon storage, ammunition. They'll be able to conduct a guerrilla war against the United States. And so the United States is we go in and quote liberators, and we're going to find ourselves being attacked. And then in the course of being attacked, then we're going to turn around and start attacking the local population, because these are guerrilla fighters. They're not wearing uniforms. So the more Cubans we kill, the greater opposition is going to build up. So, I mean, it's just, I don't think these guys have thought it through. They want to flex their muscle and have an aircraft carrier sail by, fine. But starving the people, imposing these kinds of economic sanctions on them, it's inhumane.
Let's see what would happen. And I think by Friday, we're going to have something else, some news from...
Eid will be over, so we'll find out if we're going back to war.
Exactly.
With Iran. So far, like I said, the military, all of these guys, Army, Air Force, Marines, Navy, that have been working these cats for the last 3 months. They basically most got an extended weekend off. There was just a skeletal crew, monitoring is anything going on, but nothing of a great importance. So we'll see.
Yeah, because as Larry, they said if they're talking right now about 60 days of ceasefire, but if the United States wants to stay in the vicinity of Iran, close to the Iranian borders, what does that mean? It's the same sort of blockade. It's the same sort of, during the 60 days of ceasefire as the negotiations going to happen. What would that be? I haven't heard anything from the United States considering that.
Yeah. So we're a day, I find it easy to keep track of how long this has gone on, because, it started on the last day of February, 28th. So we had 31 days in March, 30 days in April. So that's 61 days. We're now at day 25 in May. So that's 86. And then at count 28, that's 87 days. So, just do the division on that. We're at roughly week 13. We're coming on week 13 in this, so just a few days. So we're 12 weeks into this conflict. 7 weeks of it have been ceasefire.
Yeah.
And in the course of that ceasefire, Iran has been rebuilding its capabilities. So there was one site that had been, the entrances had been bombed and closed, a missile site. It's been all rebuilt, reopened, ready to go. And then, again, and reportedly, Iran has received from China some important anti-ship supersonic missiles. And I think Iran's calculus is if they return, if the United States starts attacking again, they're going to go after U.S. ships in a more concerted fashion than they have heretofore. So hopefully this war doesn't reignite, but Trump so far is refusing to take the off ramp.
Yeah. They said yesterday they shot one of these drones, reconnaissance drones, by a new air defense system. I haven't heard about it before. They call it Arash the Archer.
Mhm.
And this is I haven't heard. I heard about Bovar, Majid, something like that.
Did they bring it down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They hit and they brought it down. Yeah. So let's see what would happen. Thank you. Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today.
All right. Thank you for letting.
Unacceptable. You can't normalize with a nation that is treating.
Once again, my Wi-Fi is horrible in this Chinese hotel, so I hope it holds.
Hopefully it does, Pepe. So, Pepe, let's get into the news then immediately, because there is some breaking news. Trump has put out a very lengthy statement, and he's basically demanded. He said it's mandatory for all of these Muslim nations, the Gulf states, Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey, to all sign the Abraham Accords. What's your thoughts on this? He said it's part of the normalization and part of this deal with Iran.
Intergalactic bullshit. There's no other definition for this. Nobody's going to sign these stupid accords, Forget it. Out of the question. Obviously, he was pressured by guess who. So once again, it's an infernal machine, especially for all of us who are forced professionally to follow the twists and turns. And we always know that the next twist and turn is going to be orchestrated by somebody who has direct influence on the baboon of Barbaria. So here we are again. And it's very disheartening if we're trying to approach this from a rational point of view, which many of us have been trying. For instance, I was working on a very complex column, which I'm going to write anyway these past few days, and I'll try to send it tomorrow, about all the steps that have been followed. And this from diplomatic sources and intel sources towards what we could describe as a possible Islamabad declaration, which was what this process was leading to, with a very extremely important role played in the deep background by China. And this is something that I could confirm here in Shanghai. Of course, with the Chinese, it's via metaphors, figures of speech, indirect hints, but they have been extremely positive in terms of trying to find some sort of deal and supporting the Pakistani mediation, and of course supporting the connection between the different Pakistani envoys with Iran, with the GCC, and of course talking to the Trump administration. So as we speak, Suleiman, it's late night in Asia on a Monday. This whole thing, it's practically collapsing in front of us, just because, of course, the leader of that death cult in West Asia once again told the president of the United States, no, you cannot simply go on with this possible deal. So it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating, but totally predictable. And in fact, the sources that we were in touch with, we are still in touch with, diplomatic and intel, they actually predicted that because the mediation was advancing fast, because all the players, starting with the deep background in China, Pakistan, all practically the whole GCC and Iran, they want to try to find a diplomatic solution. They're all involved. And even the president of the United States, on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken, he was saying that the deal was advancing. And then he changes his mind. And then he posts pictures of bombing in Iran again. How can anybody on the planet and in the galaxies believe anything he says and does and posts and vociferates, etc.? So it's a completely unhinged individual. And in fact, the whole world is hostage in this situation. It depends on him to find I would say, an inkling of common sense to find an off-ramp which is being presented to him by all the players for the war that he started in the first place, and for the war that he's desperate to exit from. And we had, until a few hours ago, or until yesterday, the roadmap was there. And of course, involves concessions from all sides. But, very, very simple detail, Suleiman. The Americans had agreed on $12 billion that were in Qatari banks that should be transferred to Iran. Then they backtracked. Then Iran sent the head of the central bank of Iran, in fact, to Qatar to try to iron that out with Qatari bankers. But we still don't know if the Americans are going to allow this or not. So they promised something, they immediately backtrack. So we always go back to our great friend, Grandmaster Sergei Lavrov. The United States is non-agreement capable. So nobody can pretend that there's going to be any sort of deal, especially struck with this administration of once again, intergalactic mediocrity. And that's why they're so dangerous.
Do you think that the deal is collapsing? And the reason I ask this question is you're in Shanghai, you're in China. There's just a report that came out an hour ago, and it said that Field Marshal Assamani of Pakistan is in China. And allegedly, him and Xi are speaking. And apparently, the conversation is, or he's told President Xi that the deal is very close. Don't look at what's happening in the media.
Right.
In reality, the deal is actually close and it's not about to break down. What's your thoughts on that? Because that seems, because we thought the deal was collapsing until we saw this statement, and it's been reported by Tasneem News from Iran.
Exactly. And once again, Suleiman, that points to the immensely important role of China in the background, very discreet. And that explains, of course, Asim Munir coming to, obviously, he comes to China because basically Pakistan is representing China in this whole process. China gave full backing for Pakistan to do the mediation. China was in contact with practically all the relevant GCC members before. All of them trust China. And all of them also trust Pakistan, not to mention that Iran trusts China because they are strategic partners. So on the surface and theoretically and on a common sense basis and on a very Chinese result-oriented basis, the lineaments of this memorandum of understanding, they are all there and they are rational, they are solid, they're feasible, including concessions, of course. But of course, there's the variable that nobody can interfere with, because from the point of view of what enters Trump's brain, this is the only, I would say, hammer that can completely hammer him into submission, which is the Zionist lobby and the death cult environment, which is able to veto anything resembling peace or on a path towards peace. So the negotiators and the mediators, they knew that from the beginning. And that's where we are at the moment. So this week is going to be crucial. There's got to be some sort of breakthrough until the end of the week. On the irrational side, we had another ultimatum by Trump against Iran. Okay, but he issues ultimatums every day practically, so this is stupid. The Chinese, they are straight to the point. We have this window, we have the opportunity, we have a text that's more or less 70 or 80% agreed upon, assuming they don't backtrack, of course, and that's it. And they're giving their full backing to everything the Pakistanis are doing. So would this be enough to control the interference of the death cult in West Asia? This is the number one question, and none of us has an answer. Nobody has an answer to this question. The last thing that they want, Suleiman, our audience, all of you, and everybody knows it, is a semblance of peace. It's a roadmap to end this war, which was initiated by them and the Trump administration. So in terms of a strategic defeat for them, this is, once again, I'll go back to the galaxies, because this is being played in a Star Wars mode. Intergalactic strategic defeat, So they're going to try they will try anything in any book, anywhere throughout history to blow this thing up. But once again, and that's the danger, the final decision is with that character in Mar-a-Lago and Washington. And we know that he's incapable of thinking strategically, and he's incapable of accepting an off-ramp that will ultimately benefit him. But at the same time, he's absolutely terrified that the lobby and his donors especially are going to destroy him if he accepts any kind of deal.
I've got a few questions on that. Just to use your Star Wars analogy, does that make much the Bahamané Luke Skywalker and his dad Obi-Wan? But anyway, let's not get too much into Star Wars. I have got a question for you guys. If you're on the X Space, I will be ending it. So come to the tweet in the nest immediately after I ask the question. But the question is this: you mentioned about the Zionist lobby and how they've stopped this deal from occurring. We're hearing reports that there are two main reasons why this deal is almost about to break down. The first is the unfreezing of assets, which I don't think is major. The bigger one is that the Lebanon issue. Exactly. Iran wants Lebanon to be totally included in the deal, complete ceasefire. Israel, Netanyahu got on the call with Trump once again. It's almost like deja vu, and said, look, you can't have this situation. Lebanon needs to not be included, or it needs to be included with the ability that we continue to bomb it when we need to, and as we've been doing since 2024. What's your thoughts on that? Your thoughts on the level of impact they're having and how they could make, as you've just alluded to, the negotiations fail?
Absolutely, because Lebanon is a mega red line for Iran, part of the axis of resistance. And from the beginning, from the start of the ultra wobbly ceasefire, all wars would have to be stopped. And Iran has been saying this over and over again every day through multiple sources, political, military, etc. all wars have to end so we can start discussing the post-war, the big picture in the post-war environment. From the point of view of the death cult of West Asia, no, they want to destroy Lebanon, which they are in the process of doing it. They want to conquer Lebanese territory. They want to conquer as much of southern Lebanon as they can, and they want to fracture Lebanon irreversibly. So obviously, it's absolutely impossible. So once again, is this a deal directly with the United States, which is going to be validated by the President of the United States, or this is a deal that the final word is by the death cult in West Asia? I would say it's always option number 2. And that's where we are at the moment. And that's why there's no way to unblock it unless the President of the United States would sideline the death cult. Will he do that? Of course not.
And it's not just the death cult, right? It's also their facilitators. If you saw yesterday or the day before, sorry, when the details of the deal start coming out, basically the Zionists on social media, as well as the politicians who are controlled by them, came out in their numbers to disavow the deal, to say it was basically complete loss. This is not only the Zionists, it was also, for example, the monarchists and all of the people who have been big supporters of Trump. They all came out and attacked Trump, from influencers like, Tommy Robinson and various others, to politicians like Ted Cruz, Randy Fine, Lindsey Graham, and the names go on. And so how much can he push this deal when he has such a big pushback against it in terms of them feeling like he's conceded everything to Iran?
It's impossible, Suleiman, and we all know it's impossible. He's weak. His enormous psychological problems of having to put on this macho man act and all that, they disguise profound insecurity. He is controlled by all sides. They have all sorts of compromise on him. He hates to be painted as a loser, and now the whole planet, not only the Lego gang, but anybody anywhere looks at him and says, you are a bloody loser. You started that, and you're the major loser, and you will be the major loser. And on top of it, he's desperate to find a way out because he knows everything from now on, including the midterms, is going to be a major disaster. But once again, if he had 1% of his brain thinking strategically, it will be quite obvious for him that, okay, now you have your off-ramp, it's solid, it's feasible, everybody is involved, nobody wants a resumption of the war apart from the usual suspects. Take it, and you can even sell it, considering that you are the master of selling nothing, internally as your victory. And then you move to other things like invading Cuba. I'm sorry I have to say that, because this is so horrible that we have to say it with a straight face. They will twist the narrative the next day and find another victim. And the number one victim is even if Cuba will be defended by China and Russia. And this is something that we have from very, very well-placed sources in Moscow and here in China. If they try anything against Cuba, Russia and China will be there to help. But that's it. They change the narrative immediately. You proclaim victory, and then you go after your next victim. So this is the inner logic of an empire out of control, in an empire that is getting absolutely desperate because nothing is going their way.
One last question on this, which is about Trump made a statement previously when this ceasefire deal with Lebanon occurred, and he said, I, as the president of the United States of America, have demanded and told Israel, you can no longer bomb Lebanon. He said, I'm basically saying it as the president of the United States of America. Israel's going to listen to what I've got to say. I'm demanding it. And the next day, Israel bombed. So how, even if there's a deal reached, How can you trust that that deal won't be breached by Israel? And then won't that put Iran in an awkward situation where you have a deal, it's breached by Israel. Does Iran attack Israel? What happens? It's going to become so complex and murky.
Absolutely, and of course, the deciding circles in Tehran, they know it. Even if there is, or there was, or there would be a deal, Israel, for them is no deal. They will attack. They will continue to attack. They will continue to try to destroy Lebanon non-stop. So once again, will that be once again a direct fight between Lebanon and Israel only, or Iran will have to intervene? We all know that Iran would have to intervene. They cannot leave Lebanon by itself fighting the Israeli military machine. So, so any way we look at it, it comes back to the role of this, and there's no other definition for it, cancer. If you don't get rid of this cancer, it will continue to metastasize all across West Asia.
And that's why we think the deal is unlikely, or do you think there is a possibility it may go through?
Yeah. Well, I'm starting to become I was very optimistic during this weekend. We had some wonderful conversations about how the whole process is being set up, the role of Pakistan, the role of China, the conversations with all the GCC players, the interaction between Pakistan and Iran, auspicious aspects of a really serious, I would say, an attempt to start building a new security architecture all across West Asia. And then one day later, when you look at the predictable interference from the forces of darkness, let's put it this way, of course, it's very frustrating, as predictable as it was. But of course, they interfere directly with the so-called ultimate decider. Or ultimate non-decider, in fact.
Yeah, the deal breaker, for sure. Guys, make sure you're liking this video. Let's get the likes up. Now, you mentioned about Cuba, Pepe, and I think we shouldn't forget it. The Cuban people are brilliant people. They're being oppressed a lot. They're being put in the worst types of sanctions there are. Anybody I speak to who's been to Cuba talk about the good nature of the Cuban people. Not only have the sanctions been horrific right now, almost like a blockade has been placed on them. Nothing's getting through. They're in the basically in the minimum supply possible. You mentioned Russia. You believe that Russia and China are going to possibly help. First of all, how bad is the situation? Secondly, do you really think that? And the reason I asked that question is because for Trump, he doesn't mind. In my mind, I think that maybe he's willing to take the slight loss in Iran in his mind, but then go into Cuba and then declare that as a huge victory. How bad is the situation in Cuba? And do you really think Russia and China are going to help, especially after they kind of didn't in Venezuela, although that was a slightly different situation because some people betrayed Maduro?
Well, what we can see for sure, although Cuba is a million miles away from Eurasia, is that Russia and China will do everything to supply the Cubans to all means necessary to turn life horrible for any kind of American interference, invasion, ground invasion, bombing, whatever. And of course, continuation of the blockade. Of course, there won't be direct intervention from Russia and China. Of course not. But indirect, it can be quite helpful. And of course, Cuba is, in terms of Cuba facing the empire, this is something that they will never not only admit, but live with it. All of us from my generation, especially, we grew up with the notion of Cuban resistance. When we were in college, we all supported Cuban resistance because we understood exactly what, but in my case, they are our Latin American brothers as well. So this was very, very big all across progressive Latin America during the 60s and the 70s. And of course, Fidel was a mythical geopolitical figure for everyone. And in terms of mythical revolutionary figure, same thing with the Che. So Cuba, for the global South, was always an example of sovereignty, independence, resistance against all odds. But of course, we don't have those towering figures of the Castro mode anymore in Cuba. And the fact that they have been blockaded by Americans since forever, of course, it's something that we see in Iran after 47 years. In Cuba, we see it since the 60s. So it's very, very tough. But they have something intangible, which is this mix of diffidence, strength, inner strength, and at the same time, a fabulous swing, sense of humor. They can mock the empire practically like no other. And this is, in linguistic expressions, in body language, in absolutely killer images or metaphors and all that. But of course, you don't win a war only with that, right? If the Americans decide to go for broke and bomb Cuba to oblivion, of course, it's what they do best. It's the shock and awe empire by definition. It's the only thing they know how to do with what's left of their what was not consumed in their operation against Iran. But Cuba is still intellectually, morally, spiritually defended by the whole global South. So I hope this will be enough to dissuade the Americans from anything. But Suleiman, with these people, with the absolutely inexpressible mediocrity and vileness of these people around the Trump administration and around the industrial military complex, anything is possible. So I really hope that Russia and China, at least indirectly, make it very, very hard for any adventures.
One thing we know about Cuba is that the intelligence service is so brilliant. They've been trained for 60, 70 years to dispel the Americans, to be aware of it. This is why I always thought that they would struggle to defeat Venezuela, because Maduro used to have Cuban intelligence services around him. They're the ones who used to protect him. Obviously, we didn't expect his bodyguard to betray him. And so I guess the question to you, Pepe, is, we know the Cuban intelligence service is brilliant. They'll be aware of any kind of American plan, but what's the risk that A, that gets impeded on, and B, what's the risk that someone betrays, again, the current Cuban leadership? And the third element of that question is, how liked is Raul Castro? I know his brother was highly regarded in Cuba. I hear he is liked, but not to the same level. If you can explain to the audience.
No, it's not the same level. Yeah. Well, there's the Venezuela risk with Cuba as well. Absolutely. There can be betrayal at the highest levels of government, unfortunately. Well, but this is something, this runs all across Latin America. No? It's not only Venezuela and Cuba. This could happen anywhere in Latin America, unfortunately. The reasons are immensely complex. It starts, of course, with the colonization process and the unfinished decolonization process as well. But it's a risk, serious risk.
Explain, if you can elaborate, how is it?
No, I can't, Suleiman. You know why I can't, and I prefer to be frank with all of you. I don't follow Latin America. It was my my decision 40 years ago. I decided to concentrate in the global north and in Eurasia. So for that, I had to sacrifice Latin America and Africa, unfortunately. but I cannot follow the whole planet. None of us can, and to follow half of the world already on the north is already, you don't sleep.
And you do cover it really well. And Cuba, for the Cuban people, they have stood against, as per what you said, the oppression of the Western Empire for a very long time. The sad thing I see about Latin America is this conditioning that Americans have had over time, where psychologically they've been trained to dispel this notion of communism. And so because they've been trained from a very young age and manipulated, brainwashed, they see the people like Cuba as the enemy. They've never been to the area. They've never been to the shores. They've never seen Cubans except for those who, it's almost like the monarchists, like how the monarchists in Iran escaped. And now if you speak to some American monarchists, they'll think that Iran is horrible. But if you speak to Iranians, it's a totally different story. And it's the same with Cuba. You go to obviously Miami or any of these places, and you will have a large number of Cubans who will, and Venezuelans, but specifically we're talking about Cuba, who will vehemently attack Cuba, talk about the hardship, but not fully understand that the hardship is there because of the American sanctions. And in terms of the hardship that people are going through, it isn't because of communism or capitalism or whatever it may be. This is a brute empire abusing those people. And the people, as you mentioned, are so beautiful and so nice. And unfortunately, this manipulation is happening in terms of Cuba as well.
Communism was always a very catchy slogan for the Americans to brand enemies all across the planet, from Latin America to Africa to Europe, by the way, and all across Asia. Basically, the enemies of the empire, they are like Cuba, in a brand by themselves, because they are sovereign, independent, and they resist everything that the empire throws against them. So from the imperial point of view, this is inadmissible. These countries, nations, people have to be broken. But some are much more difficult to break than others. And that's the case of Cuba. And that's the case of Iran as well. In the case, for instance, of Iraq and Libya, of course, with brute force, you can do it. Cuba, even with brute force, is not guaranteed that they will be able to do it. In Iran, they applied mega brute force, and on the contrary, Iran is stronger now than it was 3 months ago. But they never learned, Suleiman. They didn't learn the lessons from Vietnam. Once again, it's very easy. It's a bunch of rice eaters. We go there and destroy them. History shows us what happened. Once again, it's a story of sovereignty, independence, resistance, and paying the ultimate sacrifice, millions of victims. But they subjugated the empire. There's no other way. There's no other way.
No doubt. And just bringing the conversation back to the deal, there's two biggest elements of the deal. The first one is the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran is saying that they've got control of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is saying they are going to be working with Oman with a procedure in terms of administrating the Strait of Hormuz. But there's going to be a toll. Now, they're saying it's not going to be called a toll. It's going to be called an environmental fee.
Environmental fee, you bet. Yeah.
But the United States of America came out yesterday and they basically said that the Hormuz will be totally opened. There will be no charges. It will be back to essentially before February the 28th conditions. What's your thoughts about what's happening there in terms of the disconnect in terms of the deal?
Well, a total disconnect. Iran has been saying this from day one. And from day one, in fact, from day -1, from even before the ceasefire, the architecture of the Strait of Hormuz will be completely different from what it was before. And they will not change anything. Absolutely. They have, what's been fascinating is to see how they have been experimenting with the non-toll booths. Let's put it this way. Petro yuan, you pay the yuan, you pay with SIPs, the China International Paying System, you pay cash, Bitcoin, crypto, whatever. No problem. There will be a system and it's probably going to be regulated in reals, the local currency, of course, which is going to be strengthened. And of course, there's going to be some plan Bs or Cs, which will involve necessarily yuan. No question about that. And they are already discussing with the Omanis. And the Omanis are going to have their fee system as well. And that's it. This is a replay of what happened with Suez in 56. So by 57, nobody was speaking about paying fees to cross the Suez Canal. That's what's going to happen with Hormuz. By 2027, everybody will be paying, and that's it. It's part of the system. And in fact, so far, everybody that paid, they had no complaints whatsoever. Philippines, Thailand, Japan. The Chinese don't have to pay because, of course, once again, Iraq, anybody that had to pay, nobody complained. South Korea, nobody complained. You pay the toll and that's it. You get an escort from the IRGC Navy, fine. The area is not mined. You navigate in Iranian territorial waters. Very, very simple. What we still don't know is how they're going to regulate the passage of American vessels and especially American military vessels. For the moment, we have no idea if they are going to even discuss that, right? But the architecture of crossing the Strait of Hormuz from now on that's it. It's a new world, new rules.
Yeah, and the Bitcoin people are so happy. They were like, "Wow, they've come up with Bitcoin. It's so innovative." I know Iran is like the biggest Bitcoin miners as well in the world. So, if they manage to pull that off, that will put them very much ahead. And even these kind of Bitcoin people who maybe dislike Iran are being forced to think, "Wow, this is very innovative indeed." But what about the United States of America and their statements that the strait is going to be opened as part of this deal and it's going to be free flowing?
Blah blah blah. They need to sell this to a domestic public opinion, assuming anybody in the US will fall for this. Forget it, out of the question. And that will be a serious problem as well because they will never admit it. So what are they going to do? They're going to send 2 or 3 aircraft carriers to the Persian Gulf to be sunk to try to open the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, be my guest, be our guest, be the IRGC Navy's guest. Why not? But there's no other way. They're going to have to live with it. And of course, this happened because of their war in the first place. These are all consequences of the war. But obviously, imperial powers never admit the consequences of their acts. And this one, with this particular president, forget it. They will never admit to anything.
No doubt. And it does seem like, Pepe, that there is an agreement on the Strait of Hormuz. From what I'm reading, it seems like Iran saying, look, there's no toll, so we agree with you. There's going to be an environmental fee. And then Trump's able to sell that and say, look, there is no toll. And so that way both can kind of sell the fact that Iran continues.
Yes, this will be a solution. Of course, he can sell that domestically as a win. No question. It's always a question of terminology, Suleiman. It's very, very simple. And the Iranians, because they dominate language so well and their language is so rich, the way the final, if we get to a final deal, the way any deal will be redacted will be very subtle. We just hope that this will be not lost in translation when translated into English. Farsi is a much more sophisticated language than English. So beware of lost in translation once again.
So just on that, in terms of lost in translation, some people are, again, and you mentioned about the Pakistani mediators, and there's 2 possibilities. One is that the Americans are saying something else to the public and negotiating something else, which is more likely because we did hear a report that a US official told Iran that, don't worry, ignore what Trump tweets. That's just for the Americans. The truth is what we agree on the paper. But there's also another line that's saying that maybe the Pakistanis are not doing a good job mediating and they're telling the Iranians one thing and telling the Americans the other thing. What do you think is happening?
No, it's not. This is something that I want to make it very clear in this column that I'm writing between between late nights tonight and tomorrow, in the middle of the night in Asia. Let's put it this way. They and the Pakistanis have been using several tracks. The prime minister is involved. Asim Munir is involved. Their Ministry of Interior is involved, and they are talking to everybody at all levels. Top of the Trump administration, leadership in the GCC, leadership in Tehran, deciding circles, IRGC, and politicians. So, and obviously the Chinese up to the highest levels here in China. So they are, okay, let's put it this way. Maybe in the first few weeks, many of us may have expressed doubts about Pakistani competence to pull that off. I don't have these doubts anymore. Sincerely, I was extremely impressed by the way they have been conducting this go-between game, which is immensely complicated, ultra high stakes, and they have been doing it very, very professionally. Just to give an example, I'm sure very few people know about that. When their interior minister went to Iran to advance the negotiations, you know what he brought with him? A delegation of Pakistani Shiite clerics at the highest level. And they met with leader Mojtaba Khamenei. This was a brilliant move. Immediately created a connection, a bond, mutual respect. The Iranians deeply appreciated that gesture. So, you know, this shows a level of diplomatic finesse that many of us maybe did not suspect a few weeks ago. So the Pakistanis are doing it the right way. And of course, why they are so much invested into it? Once again, because they coordinated with the Chinese. Everything is coordinated with Chinese. The Chinese are here in the deep background, but they say, okay, you do this, you go there, you talk to this, blah, 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 and we support everything that we do. So everything that you, let's say, promise or redact, etc., with the other partners, this is backed by China officially. So this is an enormous card in the hand of the Pakistani negotiators, especially Asim Munir and the Minister of Interior. These are the two. The Prime Minister, he went on a specific trip, if I'm not mistaken, from yesterday to today. But this is basically Asim Munir and the Minister of Interior. So it's very, very impressive, Suleiman. Very, very impressive. And I want to explain a little bit about that in the column, because this information comes from privileged sources, you know.
I'm looking forward to that column because, Pepe, I'm with you. I've been very critical of Pakistan.
Sure.
Very critical. But speaking to people like you and also hearing that actually Pakistan's doing a dual type of move. One is, as per what you said, becoming the negotiator to make sure this deal happens. But the other is apparently, again, just according to some sources, in the Gulf, almost replacing the American militarization of the Gulf states. And apparently I'm hearing that there's, like, again, another deal between Pakistan, China, Russia, and the Gulf states, where possibly there could be a replacement of the American military, and Pakistan will become like the defense arm of the financial and trade arm of China and Russia.
Well, I can break it to you directly, Suleiman. It's already on. There are 8,000 Pakistani troops already in Prince Sultan's base. Oh, I'm sorry, Prince Bandar. I have Bandar Bush in my mind. Oh no, I could never get rid of Bandar Bush. Okay, on Prince Sultan's air base, and lots of jet fighters as well. And that's it. And Saudi Arabia is, that's it. Pakistan is going to be our security umbrella. This in itself is already enormous, and the consequences will be long-term. So it's not going to be American bases in West Asia anymore. And Pakistan is stepping up with full support, once again, full support of China. Everybody remembers what happened in the previous previous India-Pakistani war. Pakistan won with Chinese equipment.
Yeah.
So there you go. So the opening up of possibilities, and includes everything, includes an enhanced role for Gwadar port, which is part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, the most important Belt and Road project, blah, 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 the whole thing, which, by the way, now is also an Iranian port. This is something that none of us could have expected. The Iranians are using Gwadar as if it was an Iranian port as well. So now the ports, one in the Gulf of Oman, the other in the Arabian Sea, they are complementary, Chabahar and Gwadar. And they're cousins. They're 80 kilometers away one from another. It's practically the same thing, So I would expect that in the midterm, we're finally gonna have the famous Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline finalized after a soap opera that lasted almost 20 years. I followed this thing from the beginning. The Americans have been trying to prevent this pipeline to be built, but since forever. From now on, that's it. It's going to happen, and it's an important umbilical cord for them, and it will solidify even more their very, very close strategic partnership.
You're totally right, Pepe. I was speaking to my dad about it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, the Americans have always stopped it from happening." So yeah, I totally agree with you. If that happens, that's huge. And just to add to your point, Pepe, because if you look at the defense pact agreement with Saudi Arabia, they said the 8,000 troops, they said the fighter jets, and then they said something really interesting. It was almost like an indicator. They said, and also Chinese defense interceptor equipment. And it's like, why would you say that in a deal with Pakistan?
Exactly. So it's incredible. This is changing so fast, and I would say that even the Pakistanis themselves probably were not expecting us for them to have this front seat role in West Asia, practically handed out to them. Amazing. Well, of course, Saudi Arabia, as we all know, they know how to hedge. So MBS, he's not a fool. He can be anything but not a fool. He looked around, he examined the chessboard, and obviously he concluded, I'm not going to be a stupid gangster like my former mentor, MBZ. I'm going to make my own decisions, and the wind is blowing to East Asia and South Asia.
How?
Not across the Atlantic. So that's it. He made his bet.
And I think people don't realize how huge this is, not only because
it's enormous, William. I'm sure you realize it because you're very familiar with the region, of course. But most people have no idea how this turns the whole thing upside down completely. And now we have a Pakistan that it's an Eurasian big power, which they were not until a few weeks ago. Just like Iran now is an Eurasian big power, which they were not until 3 months ago. So these two, which happen to be members of the SCO, and then we can see the reverberations in terms of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization having a much more, I would say, all-encompassing role all across Eurasia. And of course, a discussion that is already started, but it's probably still too early, to bring Pakistan into BRICS, apart from, of course, India. So how to deal with India, it's an enormous problem. And that includes how to deal with India, UAE, because India, UAE are aligned with the Zionists. So from a BRICS point of view, this cannot hold. So how they're going to solve this problem is huge. And obviously, it's not going to be solved in their summit in September in Delhi, especially because from now to September, there's not enough space for discussion, serious discussion. And unfortunately, the BRICS meeting this year is in Delhi, the worst possible venue, you know. So, but this will change a lot of stuff inside BRICS, solidify the SEO guarantee, and maybe if China and Russia and Iran start saying, look, we should bring Pakistan in, what India is going to do? But India, apparently, they made up their mind already. This Zionist Hindutva Wahhabi axis, it's not for the best interests of India at all, especially in terms of India posing as a leader of the global south. Not anymore. They cannot even try to pose as leaders anymore.
And that's the shocking thing, because just a year ago, even a few years ago, you had India that was aligned with China and Russia. You had Pakistan that was aligned with America. And it's all just flipped upside down. It's just crazy how things have changed.
It is. Absolutely. Absolutely, Suleiman. And I think we're just starting to see these rearrangements in the grand chessboard, which most of them until 2 or 3 months ago, nobody could even suspect. And now it's in lightning fast all across the spectrum.
And also, there's another thing people should be concerned about in Pakistan, which is, and the reason I'm talking about, I don't want to talk about Pakistan as much, is just because you're so well informed about it. So there's a couple of issues. One is, as you know, there was an extremist attack on by the Balochistan Liberation Army.
Army, yes.
I spoke to Larry about this, and he thought, again, Israel had its hands on that because they're not happy about the way things are going and Pakistan's role in it.
Of course.
And the other...
And MI6. Suleiman, I had, I don't know how to qualify it, but I interviewed these guys at the time of one of their cells, and I interviewed them, and they were trying to pose as civilized, but you can see that they were very, very, very dangerous. But this was the previous generation. This new generation, now they're much more radicalized, of course, and they're completely infiltrated by CIA and MI6. Complete. So obviously, their number one focus is not a Balochistan liberation per se. No, their fight is against Islamabad, essentially.
Yeah.
Essentially. You know, it has nothing to do with fighting for the rights of Baluchis. Nothing. So this could be much more dangerous, because obviously there will be more and more MI6 CIA involvement in Balochistan, and of course the back and forth with Sistan Balochistan. They always go to Sistan Balochistan. They attack a police station or something. They come, they bomb some buses. You name it. So this will continue. We're going to get much worse.
Yeah, and as much as Pakistan takes an active role, it's going to get worse. Another element is a bit controversial, so it's fine if you want to skip this question, Pepe. But I stay away from it because it just causes too much heat myself. But I've just seen a chat asking the question, which is obviously the former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan was in prison. There is going to be concerns about, let's say he was released, or maybe there may be protests or riots from his side in order to destabilize this issue as well, or maybe even randomly it may end up doing it without there being a motive behind it. What's your thoughts on that element?
Well, that's it's very complicated, because I always supported Imran Khan. My late best friend in Pakistan was a close advisor to Imran Khan. Unfortunately, he died of cancer. And of course, I always supported Imran Khan internationally in everything that I wrote. For that matter, it's not much, but he was supported by progressives a little bit everywhere. So we have to admit that the people, the junta that got rid of him and put him in jail, these people are now in power, and now they became a very good diplomats as well. So we cannot take this out of the equation, of course. But that still doesn't solve the Imran Khan problem. Are they willing to look at the whole Imran Khan issue? They should. They should, because it will be in terms of Pakistani unity, now that Pakistan is finding itself at the center of the geopolitical reconfiguration across West Asia and South Asia. There should be a role for Imran in a more unified Pakistan. So what I'm telling you, Suleiman, is very personal and auspicious in a Chinese sense, and maybe not too realistic. It's more like an auspicious wishful thinking, that they look at the whole Imran Khan issue and okay, let's be magnanimous. Let's try some internal healing, right?
I'm with you. I was a big support. I was a big supporter of Imran Khan. I still am, and as is my entire family. I think I was the last person to interview him before he went to jail.
Oh, wow!
Yeah, before he was incarcerated. But that being
Right.
said, my only concern is that now that movement may be used to destabilize Pakistan, because people are angry with what's happening. So this isn't a blight on Imran Khan, but you know how a movement is; it can be controlled. He's in jail; it can be manipulated, and they're probably afraid that if they let Imran Khan out, it may destabilize as well. And so it's become so complicated now, where because I'm so against Israel and the United States of America, I'm like, what is the best solution? And so it's become so complex.
Right. Well, hope for the best, Suleiman. Suleiman, I'm sorry, I have to go.
I was going to let you go just now. Thank you.
I'm very, very sorry,
we appreciate you coming on. We really enjoyed your time.
Coffee. Follow me.